building in this way.
I was like scraping my windshield.
Put like really hot water in this. Worst suggestions are gonna be,
Where's mine?
this is the worst suggestion you're gonna get.
My fingers were actually cold for the first time in like 3 years of living here today. Yeah,
So you lived in the Dakotas, in the America, and just imagine what happened to me.
I know.
I just-
Well, you're coming from the opposite end, so I can imagine.
You were talking.
I was actually thinking of you and Asif this morning. I was driving to campus. I was like,
I woke up and saw their message, they were discussing like snow and snow day. I was like, where's the snow? And then I looked, I was like, okay, there's snow. We good to get the class cancelled.
thought about it briefly, messaging everybody and
Exhaustive.
telling you to be cognizant of the driving conditions, but I made it here fine this morning, so. I think by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I think it's-
This is one of those times I feel good not having a car.
Yes, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. No, I totally agree with that. Having a car in the city can be a hassle, big time.
You do this part.
We should bring more about your pro of everything on all 4 states.
Really?
He only has it on that one. I'm like, there's gotta be a way to do it below. That or with this, that's what I thought, yeah.
I can certainly do that. Well, I just don't.
You don't have one.
It's something. you know.
But it's like. Especially if you sit in the back. so you
Yeah,
know, straight, yeah.
well, I like those ones on the side, because I can look at, you can still, yeah.
No, he's good so far.
Yeah, he's, I mean, he's content wise, he's a fan.
Now what do you
Ask. I get.
You're taking the fan program.
Like, ask. We'll see what person.
That's, I think it should still be Greg's content. It's not your transition to the business. I will be, well, he's taking over intro to programming next year. Transition period. No. And he's actually got the time to see. He never worked at EM. Very easy to change it. I just know I shared Greg, so.
Are you doing it this year?
So we cut it back, but yeah.
Okay.
So we're not doing like the big festival,
Oh, no.
but we're doing,
Ask the price,
Are you like last year where it was like 2 days of like?
Well, just what S3 too.
That's what he's putting.
Yeah, 2 days a week.
Oh, okay.
I just, we have, I think it's Thursday,
I should have
Wednesday?
done that last semester. It's completely unrealistic.
Wednesday, Thursday, school groups, and then 2 Saturdays are public.
Okay. That's kind of like last year.
Yeah, again, the only thing that's missing is the big festival.
Yeah.
Which is easier. You've got one here.
I don't know where the. rectify and.
And then. That's what's unified, like, I need. I think all the assignments are. Basically, like what I took with SAC last time.
Huh.
All the assignments, like, there was one that was like especially hard. I just.
You did like.
Yeah,
Not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have some accents.
We take a check. Two robots.
Okay.
Everybody see the exciting space news came out last week? The US federal government is testing the successor to the GPS system. Yeah,
The VPS,
I believe it's TPS.
I heard
I
about
can't remember what the acronym is.
visual something.
It's not visual, no. It's I mean, it's a different time-based system, except all the antennas for calculating your position are mounted on one satellite.
Ah.
So whereas GPS, how many different satellites does GPS use? A bunch, yeah, there's, I mean, a whole network of GPS satellites that we can use to determine our location. Well, this new network's only gonna take one satellite. Pretty sweet.
Faster lock.
Faster lock, more precision.
Did they say what the precision was?
Well, I mean, current GPS can get us down to centimeter.
Good enough.
For some things, but I mean, when you want to calculate a elevation model at like a super precise, so, I mean, you're talking about precision ag stuff, none of that's actually accurately referenced. Because we always have to deal with the precision of our GPS and we can only reference our data to the precision of the GPS. So if you have a sub centimeter or a millimeter, like resolution, elevation or canopy or leaf model, your source of error is larger than the resolution of your data. It's never good. So it's kind of cool. They just haven't even launched the first one. It's in their testing phase at the government facility now. It was built by I want to say it was Northrop Grumman or something like that. Are you looking at the Space News article? That's where I saw it from. Google listens to me teach up here and it recommends interesting articles. Go by L3 Harris. Yes, L3 Harris, that's right. So if you work in Envy at all, you know L3 Harris. They also develop our analysis software. I think I'm gonna try and start talking about current events when we get started, because something that you all need to get in better touch with. I mean, we'll talk about everything from like environmental issues to things like space. Because in our geospatial world, we have to be ready to respond to anything. especially since we're more on the development side, when we're talking about databases. Development of databases and then analysis towards products, and then what we do with the products is all gonna be part of this. And there's all sorts of environmental issues that occur in this area that everybody's just kind of blind to. Okay, we are sharing a screen to Zoom. Hopefully we pull them to the cloud. To be able to hear folks on Zoom. So, how'd last week's stuff go? Pretty easy, no major issues with essentially what I was asking of you. That's, it's gonna be really important that you understand what I'm looking for when you're doing these assignments. Especially if you've never went through any strategic planning exercises, because this is I mean, truly a strategic planning sort of exercise that we do when we're designing databases. You involve stakeholders, make decisions based on what they want. And like I just mentioned, we have to be able to produce that when, say, a customer or a stakeholder requests a specific thing. So just quickly, what today is going to look like, we're going to talk about last week's, well, you've got some items in the discussion, or at least you should. So I'm going to seek some answers for you from you all, and we will have a group discussion today. To start, I am going to just go through the tasks here for this week. We'll have a data basics recap lecture, because our workflows for any sort of data set has to be specific to that type of data. If our data isn't in the correct format, we have to be able to convert it so we can work with it. So it's fundamental that we have a good understanding of our different data types and hurdles that we may need to overcome in working with different data sets this semester. So I've got a lecture for that, and then your free time at the end is going to be taken up by an assignment. Assignment 1 is mapping the sea ice change. This is using remote sensing data products. So you're going to read a couple rasters into a geodatabase, and you're going to do some calculations based on those rasters. And I've got some requirements for a layout for you to produce. So this will get you back in the habit of mapping and managing spatial data. Any questions before we get started? So before we get into discussion, just to look at the week's tasks. We've got another discussion for this week. Pertains to your reading. So assignment 1, this is your main responsibility for the week. Read chapter 3 in GIS data management. This is an open textbook, so completely free. Just follow the link, read the chapter, answer the discussion. So really 2 items to take care of. Your assignment 1, and then your reading and discussion are the same thing. And we'll have discussion 3 talk here in class next Monday.
The link for that is the same reading that we had last week. Is that intentional?
Probably. Is it truly the same? Like, do I have read chapter 3 on last week's tasks too? Okay, that's fine. If you read it this week, don't read it, or if you read it last week, don't read it this week. Sound good? So just be sure to stand up the discussion then. Any other questions? Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, if you ever see issues like that, bring them up here in class, because otherwise I'm going to have like 50 people email me, and that creates a gigantic backlog for me. So if you can handle issues like that in class, please do. Work better for everybody. Okay, so let's pop over to discussions. I will quickly remind you what our discussion items were. Correct? No, I thought we had a different discussion.
The warm up one, isn't it? The second one. is-
Oh, yeah, yeah, sorry, I'm losing track of the title on these things. There we go, that looks better. I looked at this earlier. So. Two primary fundamental types of spatial data. Why might data type file format be important in data management strategies? Number two there, imagine you're a GIS specialist working in Forester for the city of St. Louis. You're making a data set of trees or database of tree health in Tower Grove Park. So I'm looking for examples of data sets that you'll include in your database, short descriptions, what the data set is, why are you including it? And I gave you a little example there. So looking at number one there, can anybody tell me what are the two primary fundamental types of spatial data? Victor.
Vector and a raster.
Vector and raster, that's very good. What's the difference between the two?
Raster is an image.
Raster is an image.
Got
Anybody
pixels.
help them out? What's an image?
It's got pixels.
It's got pixels. What structure are they in? Anybody? Grids, yep. What's held in the grid cells?
Cell value.
Cell values. What dictates their range? The bits, correct. Excellent. So those are all good. What are some different types of rasters that we commonly deal with in the geospatial world?
Spectral rasters, hyperspectral.
Let's think more specifically to formatting. GeoTIFF, that's a good one. JPEG, yep. Any others?
Yeah.
.dat, what type of data is that?
That's NV raster, I guess.
Yep. So some rasters, Vishal just mentioned a .dat. Some raster version or raster types or formats are specific to proprietary softwares. So you got to be careful with that, because if you're going to try and work with .dat data in an open source database, you're going to have a bad time. It's just not going to work. You have to figure out how to convert it. If it's a proprietary data set, that method of conversion might be wrapped up in the proprietary software, which is not good. You'll have to handle the conversion in a completely separate software and then bring it into your database that way, which pretty much says you can't automate anymore. How about other formats? There's so many different raster formats. NetCDF, what's a NetCDF?
Multi-dimensional raster.
Yeah, and it's typically used for temporal data, correct? Yeah. Sorry? CRF? What's a CRF, Avi? Yeah. How about the ASCII format? Anybody like ASCII? Why not?
Never worked with it.
Never worked with it? Okay, cool. ASCII data sets are awesome. ASCII raster is just it's a text file with 6 lines of code at the beginning that handle the referencing and the shape of your raster. And then the rest of the text file holds your data. We'll talk a little bit about it today. How about vector? So we touched on raster pretty good. What's vector data first?
Points, lines, polygons.
Points, lines, polygons. What sort of features are best mapped using vector data? Discrete. Yeah. What's discrete?
There are like quantum stuff, different area. It's not continuous.
Not continuous. Yep. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That means that there is a finite break in between one attribute or one feature and either the lack of a feature or another feature. So things that are finite in space that do not occur continuously across our landscape. These are the things that vector data is usually good at mapping. So let's take a step over to raster data. If vector data are good for discrete, what do you think raster data are best for? Continuous. So what are some continuous phenomena that we use raster data to model? Elevation, that's a great one. Temperature, that's another great one. Sorry, densities of anything, yep. Atmosphere, weather, yeah, all raster. Precipitation. Yep. So you're getting an idea, different uses. Why is data type, file format important in your management strategies? Go, Roy.
It's hard to manage when everything is a different file format, especially if there's multiple people in a project or you're using different software and stuff. If you wanted to collaborate and everything was a different kind of file size or format, then you wouldn't be able to combine any data correctly, and it just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about bringing different data sets together. So let's say we have a database that follows a specific theme and you have multiple temporal coverages that need to go in your data set. All those need to be a consistent format. Otherwise, if you're creating any script that's going to manage data for you, you have to be able to tailor the data type before it goes in that script. So it's really important for consistency across users, across versions that we're managing data sets with consistent file types or file formats. What are some other reasons format's important?
So,
I mentioned one kind of.
Yeah, so for databases, there are like two important things. One is the relation between the data, and the other is the operations which can be performed on the data. So these are two main reasons to have a different file formats.
Yeah. So I mean, we're gonna start pretty much developing our own databases from the ground up in here. And we're gonna get to a step that we're gonna design some workflows or some automated tools to handle data in your database. Those tools are gonna need to be specifically designed to match the data types and formats that you have in your database. So these are gonna be really specific tools that may only be able to interact with one specific data set in your database. But you have to be able to recognize that that data set may take a special processing method and respond to it and select the appropriate workflow for managing those data. Any other file format comments that we've missed so far?
Storage space.
Storage space, yeah. How about data sharing? What's the best type? Well, I guess for vector data, what's the most stable file type for transferring data? Shapefile, yep. What's the limitation of a shapefile?
2 GB.
2 gigs. So not too big of a data set. What we can use databases to manage our data on our systems. What are databases typically optimized for? If a shapefile is optimized for sharing, what's a database optimized for?
Storing data.
Storing and
Local execution or software.
not always anymore. We can go enterprise, cloud databases. Something I wish we covered more of in here. I've gotten specific comments from the the GIS director for the city of St. Louis that he'd like people with enterprise database experience. So shapefiles optimized for sharing. Geodatabases are good for storing data. What else? There's other aspects. What else do we do in databases?
Manipulate data.
Manipulating. So what are you doing when you manipulate data? When you run a tool or a function in Python or ArcGIS or whatever you're working in, what are you doing, generally speaking?
Data manipulation.
Data management, looking for another term.
Data manipulation.
Manipulation, that's what he said. Roy?
Analyze it in a different way.
Analyzing is a form of this. I'm thinking generally. I mean, we can manage data, we can convert data, analyze data. It's all part of processing. So for geodatabases, their main benefit is processing happens at a much expedited rate than when you're working outside geodatabases. So shape files do not process that quickly. I actually have firsthand experience in this. I designed this entire tool of mine to work with shape files, and I mean, it worked, but not all the time, because it would output subsidiary files during the processing. And some of those shape files were larger than 2 gigabytes. All had to do with the complexity of the topography that I was putting in the model. So the flatter the topography were, the smaller the data products are, but the more complex the topography is, the larger the data sets get. So I was running into issues when topography would get over a certain level of complexity, my tool wouldn't run. So I had to update the entire thing to work in a geodatabase. Works perfectly now, and it also cut the processing down from like 4 hours down to about 40 minutes. So there is definitely a trade-off. Could some of the inputs that I use, I mean, we're talking like 10, 20 gigabyte elevation models. We're talking like 3-meter elevation models for rivers that are 700 miles long plus. So pretty big data set sometimes. Yeah, Rena.
Like really advanced, I guess, or something, but like why does it work like that?
Oh,
Is it like compressed or something, or?
there is some compression that goes on in geodatabases. That's a great question. I do not have the development background that would probably be required to answer that in a good way.
It's just like we know.
Anybody else have any guesses as to why a geodatabase is more efficient at processing?
Your database is good for our product. So that's their format. So they create everything on that format. That's why it takes less time.
The shapefile is proprietary to Esri too, though.
But your database is specially designed for the feature class.
Right. But I mean, so you're saying they don't design tools for shapefiles then?
So the motivation behind geodatabase was to store large data
Yep.
in small compressing something. So that's why that takes less time.
Understood?
I
Right.
understand. it.
Yeah.
It's not the developing scientific answer.
Yeah, okay, right on. So everybody understand that? What Supriya is saying? Because that's I mean, the way they designed it is to be stable for processing. And I mean, the compression helps minimize the file size it needs processed to. So a couple things that lead into better processing in geodatabases. Anybody know the open source geodatabase version? How about a geo package? No QGIS users in here? That's the one I know. Geo packages would be your open source version of a geodatabase. And there's very limited compatibility going between a geodatabase and a geo package. There is one tool that can convert them, and that's it. Okay, on to the fun part of this. Imagine you're a GIS specialist working as a forester for the city of St. Louis. Job is to create a database of tree health in Tower Grove Park. Aside from because we are going to have a tree health data set, right? Everybody should probably have that. That's what do we call that? The data set that we want our users to focus on.
Feature data set?
Nope, don't get confused. That's just we use that as a file type in here. How about a data product? Because when we're selling this thing, we're not going to sell the database. We're scientists in science programs in here. So you should be focusing on the product that you're going to get from your database, not just the database as the product. The database as the product is great for some, but we need to be able to understand the product that we want before we ever build the database. Because when you approach this from the strategic planning framework, the people you have who you're trying to get money from, let's say, they're gonna have specific products that they want. They're not gonna think about the database as a product. I actually have. I'm on the CERC committee here, the Science and Engineering Research Council, and there's no method of databasing research technology across the campus right now. We share Excel files at the department level. So we're starting this process from scratch for the university. We're hoping that it can find redundancies in software subscriptions across campus and help students better network, develop research networks, and help new faculty like me develop research networks. Because right now I have to go to the clunky SLU website, go find a specific faculty's webpage, and then read the topics that they do research in. And by the time I've done that, I've already spent too much time doing it. So, aside from our data product, what other data sets are we going to include? So I'm going to call on individuals. I want to hear your data set, your description, and your purpose. Anybody want to give me a supporting data set for our tree health data product? Mila?
Digital elevation model.
Digital elevation model. What is it?
It's with the digital surface model, we can calculate the tree.
Wait, surface or elevation? You've used both words now.
Oh,
I'm confused because specifics are really, really important here. Because you say surface model, I think one thing. You say elevation model, I think of something completely different.
digital surface model.
Okay, so then what's a surface model?
It's the model of the land surface of the area.
Just the land?
Surface. I think it's on the name. So,
You should probably know this by now.
yeah,
Because we're gonna get to your defense. And I'm gonna pepper you with questions that could potentially make you feel really stupid. I'm tired of getting to defenses and asking people what the resolution of an elevation model is, and they don't even know what a digital elevation model is in the first place. What's a surface model, Camilla?
surface model is the model. It has a the surface of the area.
The surface of the area.
Yeah, for example, if Tower Grove Park in that area, we have to
What does it capture? You said ground first, right? Or land.
run.
So what's a surface model capture? I want her to answer.
Oh, no.
Don't look at your computer. Give me a guess.
Digital surface model gives the height of the surface of that area.
What surface? You can't use the definition in the,
The structure with that, if you have digital surface model with the digital terrain model, we can calculate the tree height or the height of the subject there.
so you're not just capturing the land surface, correct? So what other things are captured then?
What ever the object in that area.
Whatever objects in that area? So what objects would be in that area? This, like I'm saying, specifics are going to be very important here.
Trees,
Yes,
the structure, any objects that above the ground,
which would be what? Buildings?
yeah, structures, trees,
But
plants.
structure can mean many different things.
The structure is, what I'm trying to say is the buildings.
Yes. See, I mean, I think of geologic structures when you say the word structures.
So the structures in the Tower Grove Park is not geological structures, but the buildings that people made. With that, it can be, the height of the trees can be calculated.
Okay, so we went from an elevation model to a structural model. That's excellent. We have an idea of what is held in the structural model. It's everything that your sensor, but if you're using a LiDAR sensor, everything that's going to be captured in your LiDAR data. You can take the maximum for your points to get the canopy of the trees, the tops of buildings. That's all going to be captured in your structure model. Now let's say we're going to bring an elevation model into our database. What's an elevation model?
Measures the different altitudes, like in the pixel.
No, altitude is the height above the Earth's surface.
Okay, the level of the ground.
In what?
Slope.
No, not slope.
Isn't like the difference.
The word is in the acronym. Elevation.
Sea level?
Elevation. It holds elevation information of the ground's surface. Nothing else. Filter out buildings, filter out trees. So if we have a LiDAR sensor that's handling this data collection for us. Anybody use LiDAR sensors, know LiDAR data a little bit? So there's a bunch of different returns in LiDAR data, right? You're gonna use the first returns, any of the middle returns, or you're gonna use the last return to get your elevation data. Probably gonna be the last return, right? Right?
That's gonna be the lower level possible.
I mean, you want the light pulses that have traveled the longest distance to the ground and back, not the ones that return first from the top of the trees. So we got to understand these things, because if we're going to design databases to work with these data sets, it's imperative that you also understand the data that you're working with. So what's the purpose of said surface model? And then I'll be done picking on you. Yeah.
To calculate the height of the tree
How are you going to do that with only a surface model?
with the digital elevation model.
Okay, so that's really important to note in your purpose then. Because that directly tells anybody else who gets their hands on your data set and wants to use your database to calculate a data product. They know what two data sets to go out and subtract. What's the calculation that you might do to calculate canopy height? And are you going to include that in your database?
Yeah, it is. It could be one of the many database, but
Could be another data product, right?
it's one of the,
So if you want to calculate canopy height, what's the math going to look like?
height is digital surface model minus digital elevation model.
Perfect. Yep, super easy. Run it in the raster calculator. You could automate that, especially if you took intro to programming. I know you could. Nice work, Camilla. Thank you.
I think you just killed me with dissertation. I forgot about that.
Oh, yeah, I've had mixed experiences. So, next, Roy, your hand was up, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so what's another data set we're gonna bring into our database here?
well. I was thinking, one of them could be either like. Development, as in like actual like impacts that, you know, I guess. Whatever neighborhood that is. Have had on the impact, like on the soil, whether they've, you know, geologically moved things around. You know, what it looked like before versus.
So
how they do it now.
development, we're in a gray area here. How are we gonna measure development? You mentioned soil.
Yeah,
But
well,
I mean, it's also really important that we're able to decipher what we mean when we use certain terms.
I guess it would be like types of soil and, I guess, you know, if they have added like drains in the park or if they.
Let's stick with soil. Let's stick with soil. Drains is a completely different thing, right?
Is development too broad for a data set?
Absolutely. Yep. That's kind of on the structure trend where there's a bunch of different types of ways that we can define the term development or structure. So it's really important to be precise when you're talking about certain things like that.
Yeah, then I guess.
What I would say is probably just cut it off at soil type.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's gonna get too complex. Now, on that note, if you wanna, show the possible development of the area of Tower Grove Park, you might want compaction information in your soil, because when we develop or build, we typically use heavy machinery that compresses your soil. And that's a big deal, because that means that water can't go down as fast as in areas where it hasn't been disturbed. This is very well documented, actually. We read a really cool paper centered out of a couple of neighborhoods in Pennsylvania while I was out there. They were taking compaction measurements and looking at the time of when specific houses were built, because the technology used to build houses has completely changed over the eras of house building. And when heavy machinery was used on certain construction sites, they found that soil, both compaction wise and natural structure wise, was highly alterated for certain properties. So Roy, if we are flexing our answer to be a soil type sort of data set, can you describe what that data set is and maybe some attributes it might hold?
Yeah, it would probably be, well, it would hold the soil type. I don't know if we would add soil compaction to that, or if it would just stick with soil type.
How about bulk density?
Yeah,
Sounds good to me. We can put that as an attribute, no problem.
and probably whether it was imported.
Imported soil,
Or just like, not,
the soil type would tell that.
yeah.
So you could have another attribute, native or non-native.
Yeah.
What are non-native things called? Things that are picked up and,
Invasive.
invasives.
Not
There's a
necessarily.
difference.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
Non-native. Non-native and invasive are two different things.
Yes, we, yeah. A lot of our international students might have something to say about that.
A lot of non-native things can be invasive though.
But a lot of non-natives can not be invasive.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's usually the problem comes from the importation of non-native things. Cause it's usually if it's historic.
I was looking for more of the scientific term. I believe the term we use in geology is lochthanous, when we have a material that was moved to another location, usually by a natural process. Really common with glaciers around North America. You see like boulders out in like fields.
It's just a lot of the invasives in South Florida
From Canada.
Like a lot of the invasives in South Florida were brought over for all of these different things, but like all of them.
Yeah.
Had this niche that they wanted in the ecosystem, which was already there, but they weren't that smart people. But those kind of things were meant to
butt in here, Roy, and take them back over.
they were meant to have an impact like that.
Everybody has seen Phragmites australis growing around here. This used to be used as a packing material for boats coming over from Australia. And it is everywhere that a ship could have possibly landed on the eastern seaboard. It has also come up the Mississippi River, all the way up the Mississippi River. So there's eradication projects that go on, like up in the states that still have a chance against Phragmites, like Minnesota. But in most areas, we just accept it. It's terrible. It alters the groundwater chemistry, so nothing can grow around it. When you burn it, the seeds do not die. So fire spreads the seeds even better. Look for it. It's usually super tall, tufted. If you're driving along the Mississippi River corridor, you will definitely see it. Okay, and then what's the purpose, Roy, of our of our soils data set or our soil type data set?
It would really, the purpose would be to figure out exactly what kind of soil a lot of those trees are based around, you know, whether they have planted trees that were in one kind of soil versus another kind that they had put in, and how, you know, whether it, you know, how it can hold water, the kind of nutrients that are in it, and, you know, how it reacts to, you know, like leaf litter and other things, you know.
Do you have any soils people in there? What are some different soil types that we might see in a soil data set?
You have like alpha sols,
Yep.
isosols.
Yep.
Sols.
Love technical terms. All kinds of salts.
Or you can be talking about like their percentage of like loam, sand, or clay.
Yep, exactly. That's what I think
A
about.
little easier.
Yes, yeah. I'm not a true soils person. I do dabble a bit for my geomorph stuff, so it's typically about the mix of what's in it more than the technical term for me. But I appreciate that. There's a lot of different soil types when it comes down to it. Roy, you're spot on about, I mean, the significant aspect, I think, for our tree database is going to be their water content, how well they hold water. And also how well the roots are aerated is another important part of it. Juan?
I was gonna say, maybe the soil type would not be that good, because I don't know if there can be a lot of changes in a small surface, right? Usually soil types are like more extensive, right?
Yeah, soil types are usually tied to, well, around here, they're tied to the glacial geomorph and the landscape history. Because, I mean, we live in a really weird area that was kind of exposed for periods of, I mean, our last ice age, and sometimes it was covered up by floods from gigantic lakes up north, which scoured away some soils. So it's the complexity of soils here is much higher than where I used to live. Out in the Red River Valley, it's all pretty much really heavy clay rich soils. They're some of the best agricultural lands on earth because of the glacial activity that stirred up, killed all kinds of organic matter. Makes for great soil to grow crops in. But once you get up that far north, you're presented with all kinds of different problems when you try and grow stuff up there. Moving on. Mariah,
Plant species,
plant species, what sort of plants?
all of them that
All
are
of
in
them.
that specific area.
We're not focusing on the trees, we're looking at the plants around trees. Excellent. So what are some things that could go in there?
It's gonna be point data,
Okay, cool.
and it'll have the location and the plant species names. That's about as far as I got with that.
Okay. Can we crowdsource some other things to put in this supporting plant data set?
If it's non-native plant.
Good. Non-native, native. Why might we want to know about that?
Is this the purpose part of this section or?
No, I'm just asking general questions now. We can keep crowdsourcing, or you can blurt out if you want to. Okay,
So my why was to identify species and how they could impact tree health.
okay. So, I mean, we just got done talking about Phragmites, and I mean, picture Phragmites growing in a park setting here in urban St. Louis, which is not out of the question. There's gonna be an issue with groundwater chemistry around Phragmites, which might impact tree health otherwise. Roy?
Would it be important or even a point to add if any of those plants, whether they're, you know, I mean, I'm assuming like a lot of them could end up being, you know, non-native, if they have anti-competition, like attributes?
Yeah, absolutely. Once we get into the design of specific attributes in a table, I like to think, I mean, here in our research world, include as many attributes as you possibly can. It might be difficult to get the data, but it could be something that really changes the understanding of fundamental things that we think we understand. Because when we're making decisions on research, a lot of times, we all live in the capital world where we have to limit our decisions based on the resources that we have. Sometimes it's just not feasible to get the data that we want. We have to make changes to our research. So here, We live in the ideal world, so what you want to include in your database, include it, whether or not you think you can capture the data or not. Anything else you want to add, Mariah? Okay, I like that one, so we can see other plants that might affect tree health. There's negative effects, there's also positive effects. What might some positive effects be? I don't want to focus sheerly on the negative.
Sharing microbiome.
Sharing microbiome, yep. What do you mean by that, August? Can you elaborate for our non-bio folks?
So there's, you know, a lot of root systems will intertwine, for example. And there's gonna be, just like we have a gut biome, there's like a root biome that can be shared between plants.
What are those called? Mycorrhizae? Mycorrhizae, yeah.
And a mycelial network,
I know, yeah. Yeah, so there's fungal networks underground that aid in the uptake of nutrients for plants. It usually works best when they already exist. If you're planting a tree, it's gonna struggle starting out if it doesn't have those resources that it needs or the ability to extract them. The mycorrhizome. Very interesting part of Earth. All right, let's get one more. Yes,
fertilization plan.
huh?
Fertilization plan.
Fertilization plan, yeah, the maintenance and upkeep plan of the living organisms. Yeah, kind of interesting too. So what's your description of this gonna be?
I would go like, how is the park? Like,
How is the park?
and like,
That's a very general statement.
no, like,
The park is good. Nice park.
is it? Why are we,
Tower Grove? I like Tower Grove Park.
why are we checking tree health?
I don't know. Yeah, yes, yeah, we need to come up with a management plan.
Right? So,
Yes.
and then like, how is the park fertilizing? Is there an area that has not been fertilized?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it'd be a map showing like, schedule, how frequent, the areas that are getting fertilized, the areas that are not getting fertilized.
Yes, yeah, and this is gonna be an interesting data set because it's gonna be like a data product because we need to know when plants need managed. We need to know who to call and how to inform them to manage them. But it's also going to be a supporting data set for our plant health data. Because when we treat a certain tree a certain way, how does its health respond? We should be able to see some updating of our data product based on a management plan. So that's excellent. That's a great example. Because actually I have multiple people with forestry experience here in the city of St. Louis who have specific management plans. They have every single tree in every park of St. Louis databased, and they have a management plan for those trees. They know the species, they know the health, they give a general score in terms of its health. So, forestry is really cool stuff. They do a fantastic job of managing data. We kind of talked about purpose a little bit, being a supporting data product, informing your management plan, and also giving us extra information about the efficacy of our treatments. So I think that's a good place to stop in terms of our discussion. Anybody else want to add any final thoughts, Roy?
Would you, in the maintenance, in that maintenance database, would you add like whether or not they use insecticides or?
You certainly could. Oh, yes, yeah. That's really important to know too, because some city trees are fruiting trees and people eat the food that's available to them, especially when times are tough. There's actually a whole database on the fruiting trees in cities. It's cool. And it's important for people to know that. If your tree is treated with pesticides that are gonna give you cancer, you probably don't want to eat the fruit, or at least you want to know it so you can make that decision for yourself. Not be lied to by the government. Right? So we just had the largest overtake of our produce standards in terms of what's organic and what isn't. Yeah, because we've been living by false standards. I'm finally starting to make changes. Okay, that's excellent. Thank you all for your participation in that. So next, everybody doing okay? Don't want to break right now. Okay, we're gonna keep moving along. And I hop back over to modules. I gotta clean up these menus. Realize that didn't transfer over from last. These could be organized better, right? Yeah, on the side over here. Yeah. Thanks for that advice. It's water, I swear. All right. So just some topics that we're going to cover today. The first point is what we're here to do. It's great that we're going to be able to make databases, but you got to understand the point of why we're doing it in the first place. Some of it's going to be to answer our own personal questions and interest. Other times it's going to be to satisfy a stakeholder or a customer. We'll get a little bit of background on spatial data. This is going to be, kind of recap from our discussion. So if these are topics that are kind of new to you, we will make sure there is a fine understanding of these. And then we'll talk about some spatial data management basics, and this will funnel into our assignment 1. Anything before we get started? Mariah, you are making me sweat just looking at you.
It's cold.
I'm sweating up here already. And it was freezing when I got in here. I can confirm that. All right. So here in the geospatial world that we live in, there's typically 2 types of projects that we work on: descriptive projects and prescriptive projects. So descriptive may describe a pre-existing condition or a current condition, and prescriptive evaluates an unknown or a future scenario. This generally sets the demands for the workflows in your project, how we're managing data. Do our data exist already and we just need to pull them, or do our data being created by some model? We may use like a machine learning model to get a prescriptive condition, things we might not be able to use remote sensing for. What data type is that? What file type is that? These are all going to be important things in working with these data. So it's important to know ahead of time. Who's working on descriptive projects in here? Past scenarios, current examples. My thought is most would probably fall under descriptive, right? Yeah. Anybody doing prescriptive stuff in here? Trying to model into the future or completely like unknown variables? What are you doing, Supriya? Can you explain to everybody? Why do you, and explain why you say prescriptive as well?
I'm trying to build some models which can predict the future seed composition.
Okay, yes, yeah, no, that's great, because we're using descriptive products to do this too, correct? Yeah, so that's a perfect example, because ideally, in the growing, I guess, season, when would we like our prescriptive information on yield or seed content? When would we like that?
As early as possible.
Yeah. Because the whole point of doing it is to estimate the future.
Earlier the harvest.
Yep, yeah. And that those are also really important models because they can dictate your treatment of your crops too. Who else had their hand up for prescriptive? Camilla?
Similar research.
Yep, yeah, seed comp stuff, yep. Any yield prediction, trying to do yield predictions in field prior to, yep, that's a version of prescriptive. Yes.
So can we say classification would be descriptive analysis and regression is the prescriptive?
If you're projecting out to an unknown state, or I say state, like not like a geographic location, but like a environmental state, yeah. Or like a growth state. You want to predict health into the future. That's prescriptive. Yeah, Avi.
Anything that uses predictive modeling would be prescriptive.
Yes, yeah. So when we're starting from scratch, because that's where we're starting in here, the first thing that you should do is come up with a research question. Now, you might have this research question from your actual research. It might be driven by your own interest. I'm lucky enough, I live in a world where my research questions are driven by my own interest. But the point is, the question, the research question is going to set the subject or theme for your project. So within that, you're going to know what is generally important to your data product. And it will help you also determine what to leave out, because we have to draw that line somewhere. It's great to try and be as exhaustive as possible, but like I said before, it's not always feasible. So coming up with your subject or your theme is where we can also weed out other data sets that might not pertain to your product. So my examples here, what cities are most rapidly growing and shrinking? So what theme would you say this falls under? First off. Urban development. How about population dynamics? I like those words. What's dynamics mean? Moving. And that's exactly what people are doing when cities are growing or shrinking, right? They're moving to new cities, coming from other places. So there, one example for you, real-time temperature around the US. So what's the subject of this? Climatology, climate. Climate takes an extended period of time. What if we're just looking at temperature instantaneously? This is real time. So it's real time now, real time now, real time now. It's not looking at extended climate.
Meteorology.
So meteorology, yep. What's temperature also pertain to? We have any physics people in here? Physics, chemistry? Pressure, yep. Confined gas law, right? What's a confined gas law? PVT? Yeah. Welcome to physical science. Where's climate change expected to have the greatest impact? Could be another theme. So, this is a hot topic these days. We want to know where it's going to be okay to live or what areas it won't be feasible to live anymore. So trying to calculate and quantify climate change impact is a large area of research right now. It's something that TGI specifically focuses on in their research. Geospatial is a great way to understand and quantify this. Here's one. This is a nice fun one. Let's say we're not experienced with having lived through COVID before.
Was this question on here beforehand?
No, I started here when it was in the middle of COVID. So there's vaccine examples worked in a lot of my classes. Yeah, no. How do you plan for where vaccines are gonna be offered? We're speaking from a standpoint where we haven't responded to a pandemic recently.
Based on the demographics, for more population, go where more.
Yeah. Yep. So that really helps you plan. It sets your subject. You have a goal in mind. You want to distribute a vaccine to the people who need it the most. That was our primary response to COVID, is to focus on the at-risk people. And that's a great response. So we have to be able to focus on certain demographics. That's going to be included in this. Population density is going to be included. And then what happens as time progresses from the beginning of the pandemic on through the pandemic? how does vaccine research progress? Sorry?
Research?
Yeah, as we're developing vaccines for things like COVID. What did the first round of vaccines do for us?
I mean, it kind of gave a large testing pool, I guess, for like reactions and other things.
Who were they? So who was our testing pool for those first vaccines that were developed?
Well, I guess the most at risk, or
Were they little kids?
no.
Yeah. Kids came way later, right? Yeah, so I mean, we started with the at-risk individuals, we moved on to the adult masses. And then we started testing on younger and younger individuals, learned more and more. So really, I mean, the vaccine, the progression of how it was implemented to the population might have needed to change over time because the population is not evenly distributed. And their demographics are definitely not evenly distributed. We know that very well here in St. Louis. You have to be able to find different ways to satisfy different customers, i.e. different communities. Regardless of, I mean, what your database is doing. There could be different people that need to use that database in different ways to get different answers. And then another theme, where should my company build its new location? So, I mean, what theme might this fit? Transportation could be one.
And just land development.
Development, again, here we go. What's development? I'm just joking. Gonna be the word of the day coming from Roy, development. How about optimization? That's truly what the theme of this is. It's an optimization issue. What type of optimization is it? Network or service optimization, right? Because we want to place our business where our prospective customers are, not far away from them, right? And when people are traveling to your business location, what are they going to use to travel? A car. And we drive our cars on what? Highways, roads. They are organized as what? A network. So whether, I mean, the customer base needs to be considered, spatial extent of your customers need to be considered, and also the physical systems that they are going to use to interact with your company. Of course, websites are really popular today, but this example could be applied to say, I mean, if we're offering like health services in this new company, it's really important that your customers can set foot in your office if they need to and get the care that they're looking for. So the point is here, the question at hand determines which data sets are necessary, how those data are managed, and then also displayed, because ultimately we're going to keep hitting on it. This is all to satisfy a customer or your own scientific interests. So if you're the customer you want to satisfy, you want to make sure it's all good, and you're not including things that don't need included, or vice versa. Data types, we talked about these already. Raster data come in gridded data format, spatially continuous or discrete. What's I mean, we said vector was better for discrete. What's an example of a discrete phenomena that we can use raster data to model? Victor?
Sink areas, drainage things.
Sink areas, yes, yeah. How might a sink raster look?
Spotty.
Spotty, yeah, it's mostly one color, right? And then there's typically like splotches where your sinks are, correct? Yeah. What is a sink, Victor?
Internal area, area of internal drainage.
Area of internal drainage, fantastic. What's another discrete phenomena that's typically modeled in raster form?
Land use.
Land use, land cover, LULC. Who manages that data in the US? USDA, yep. Any others? Can we think of one more?
Weather to some extent.
Weather to some extent, yep, you are correct. What sort of weather?
You're looking at like a certain like rain event over an area, most likely a raster, just like in that it was like. There's gonna be cell values that are more poignant.
Yeah, yep. There'll be a rain area versus a not rain area, maybe. Depends how you treat it. And that's also worth thinking about some too. The treatment of your data is all up to you. And I mean, I've gotten to scenarios where I've had to go back and forth between continuous and discrete data. So, I mean, there's always the possibility of extracting more discrete information from your spatially continuous models, especially if you're doing like classifications or machine learning stuff is really popular. Vector data, points, lines, polygons, things that are discrete in space. The example I give over here is a stream network. What are some different aspects of a hydrologic system that could be dictated or I guess communicated in vector data? So let's start with parts of a hydrologic system. Roy.
I was just gonna say like industry that's around the system and if they've, impacted it. Like location of, talking about raster or vector?
So, all right, let's take a step back. What's hydrology?
The study of how water moves and
That's hydraulics.
usually through systems.
Movement of water over land. Hydrology pertains to the quantity and quality of water. Broken into two domains, subsurface water and surface water. So if we're talking surface hydrology, where would your industry data set fit in? Would it fit in on the quantity or the quality side of hydrology?
I'm not quite sure, maybe.
Let's open it up to everybody else.
Maybe it depends on the industry.
Does it? Are you sure?
I mean, some industries might affect the quality of the water, if you're placing your water, for example. And then some industries, like, for example, they are built in places where they affect the water movement, they can affect the quantity of the water.
Well, regardless if I'll say industry entity is producing a chemical pollutant or not, doesn't it exist physically? So what happens when a raindrop falls on something that it cannot seep into or be absorbed by? It's going to run off, right? So my thought is industry would probably affect both the quantity and the quality of water. So maybe you have a data set that is just the footprint of your industrial entity. And then maybe there's a separate part that covers the quality effects. So let's think about the actual aspects of the hydrologic network itself. What landscape feature is a hydrologic system found within? What is the area known as? Watershed. So that is one. What's another? Well, okay, let's stop there. Stop there. I'm not gonna rush ahead. What vector data type would a watershed be? Polygon. Why do you say polygon? Why can't it be a line?
An area.
Because it's an area. Yeah, and you want it to have an area attribute, right? Because if think of a rainstorm moving across your watershed. We're going to create a model to estimate the runoff in river channels from a rainstorm. Okay. What was I getting at? We're going to drop X amount of rain on said watershed. That amount of rain is going to have a depth. But the discharge of channels is calculated in cubic meters per second. So we have a volume over a time. So how are we going to go from a depth of rain to a volume over time? Because all of those things need to be incorporated into our database. Victor?
Flow accumulation.
Yeah, flow accumulation would be one way. Essentially, we're going to do some math times the depth of your water that fell on the watershed times the area of the watershed gives you what? What was that?
Water accumulation.
Water accumulation, and in what unit though is what I'm looking for. Volume, yeah. So this way you can break your models up into time steps. You have a precipitation model at different time steps. So that way you can bring, if you have your time step being set as like an hour or 15-minute time steps, which is typical of a hydrologic model for a single event. This way we can bring the time aspect into it as well. What other features would go into said watershed model database? Yep.
Location of any like dams or bridges that might.
Dams, bridges, those are great. What are dams built on? Sorry,
Drainage channels.
drainage channels. Yeah, how about like rivers? Yeah, that's pretty much fundamental. What's another part of hydrologic system? Roy, streams, rivers, same thing, just scale difference.
Topography of the
Yep.
area.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if we're considering the full working hydrologic model that this database is going to support, it's going to have a really detailed elevation model that's going to be pre-processed, right? We're going to have to fill the sinks so the water runs off, the flow accumulation works. The most important thing that we're going to get from the elevation data set in terms of our working hydrologic model is actually going to be the time that it takes for water to run off of a watershed area into a drainage channel. The steepness dictates how well the water absorbs into the soil and how efficiently runoff is created as well. Use time constants to do all that stuff. Super fun. It's all based on the distance and of each part of the watershed versus the slope of individual areas of a watershed. So what are some other features in our database? We have watershed, which is a polygon. We've got rivers, streams, which are probably what? Lines, correct. What are some other hydrologic features, Roy?
I mean, land use is, that wouldn't necessarily be a hydrological feature, but it would.
Oh, it is. It certainly is. Yep. So the first thing we do after we assemble our data sets is we have to do some calculations to determine the budget within each sub area of our watershed. When I say budget, I mean how much water is making it into the subsurface and how much is running off. There's different sorts of hydrologic models that take into account really like fine time spans and can actually see the absorption of water into the subsurface. So that way, when your soil is saturated, it knows to send runoff to a channel and not into the subsurface. Land use actually goes into calculating curve numbers. Anybody know the term curve number? Or yeah, it's essentially an estimate of the percentage of water that runs off given land use and soil states. So it takes your soil data in, we'll calculate soil models based on that, and also your land use. How about lakes? Yeah, lakes, ponds, also hydrologic features. What format might these be stored in? Polygons, yep. Things like dams. What format might a dam be stored in? Point. There's a couple different ways that it's handled out there, depending on the data set you go to. The Army Corps of Engineers, they list dams as points. But for the National Hydrography Data Set, which is the support for, the nation's water models, they actually use lines for features. They're tied to elevations. In some pretty recent developments, actually, the National Water Hydrology Model is moving from a raster format to a vector format. Really, it's interesting stuff because, I understand both methods and why there might be trade-offs. But I mean, it's just bizarre to me that we start in one fundamental format. And then we're in this transition period to go to the other fundamental format. Our computing technology is changing a little bit. Our ability to analyze vectors is becoming better, more precise than our raster data can give us. Okay, that's enough with that. Here's some examples of raster data, matrix of cells. What's a matrix? Not the matrix, a matrix.
Digital.
A grid, yeah, yes, thank you. Some examples, image, satellite image, weather models, all come in raster, statistical models, interpolations, gradings. Spatial resolution pertains to the accuracy of the detail of your grid. What are some different common spatial resolutions that we work with in our geospatial world when it pertains to raster data? Yeah, so give me a data set and the resolution of it.
DEMs,
30-meter DEMs, what do those come from?
model surveys.
30-meter digital elevation models usually collected by radar. Yeah, yep. It is pretty cool. The shuttle radar topography mission for global topography mission, way bigger. It's like 90 arc seconds or 30 arc seconds. I can't remember off the top of my head, but much larger resolutions. Other examples? What are the resolution of some rasters coming out of the remote sensing lab? Because when I'm in your defense committees, because I'm in every defense committee, I'm gonna ask you what the resolution of your raster is, and I'm sorry, but you better know it, because I mean, if you're answering questions specific as the ones I know you're asking, then you better know your data.
1 centimeter, maybe?
1 centimeter, yeah. In my world, I use, for my dissertation, I used a photogrammetric method to make sub-millimeter elevation models of an experimental river that I was using it to do my science. What are some other resolutions that are common? What's Sentinel data in?
10 meters.
10-meter resolution. What is resolution? When we say we have an image with 10-meter resolution, what does that mean?
What the pixel represents in the real.
Speak up.
What each pixel represents spatially in the real world.
Yeah. So what one cell of our pixel means on the ground. What is the minimum resolution that is needed to map a specific object? That object has a size. What is the appropriate resolution to map that object with? Fabio.
That's the size of the object.
You learned something last semester. Thank you. That's a midterm question, right? Yeah. Raster encoding, a couple different examples here. So encoding, this is, how our data are held in the raster. I say data, these are the values. These specifically are the values that pertain to what type of raster? Huh? Discrete or continuous? That's what I'm looking for. Discrete. Why do you say discrete?
Continuous. So there's nothing again there.
Well, it's not continuous. Yeah, you're right, it's not continuous. Because we have, it's either an on or off scenario here. It's a binary raster. We have a 0 or a 1. So that's how we know it's discrete in this case. Everybody starting to understand how the encoding works for each? Cell by cell encoding. What's it doing? Listing a value for each cell of the raster. That simple. Whether or not there is a 0, whether there is a 0 or a 1, we're always putting a placeholder. So cell by cell is not going to skip any cells. Run length, because we only have 2 values. All we're doing is signifying the start and the stop of our runs in our rasters. These are organized by lines, so we can have multiple runs per line. So row 1 up here has a 5 for the cell in the 5th position being populated by a 1. Row 2, 5 and 6, we've got 2 cells in position 5 and 6. And so on and so forth. Now quad tree gets a little more interesting. Quad tree is describing quadrants of the raster. So we're breaking the raster up into different levels of squares. Everybody see the breakdown of squares on here? So we've got whole raster, 4 quadrants. How many quadrants do we have here? 16 quadrants. Why do you say that?
4 times 4 is 16.
Indeed.
It's the like the exponential breakdown of grid.
Yeah, I mean, it correlates to this on our raster. So where we have quadrants that are entirely populated by yellow cells, like these 2 in here, we don't need to carry any more information there. So we don't even graph it or map it in the final layer of our quadrants. Because this is where we're breaking down those smaller subquadrants into the individual cells. So if the entire quadrant is filled with values, we don't need to map the rest of the quadrant. So this circle right here pertains to this quadrant. This circle pertains to this quadrant. Square, we've got yellow. So that means square says there's going to be another layer of the quad encoding here. So then we've got the different cell positions within that grid.
It's supposed to be like 3 yellow.
Yeah, it sure is.
Oh, it's, I think it goes.
Is it going down?
Yeah.
Oh, yep.
Or even like the first.
That would, no,
No, I think it's,
It's the first 2 and then it drops down
yeah.
and it makes a square. So it goes this one, this one, this one.
we gotta obey the quad tree structure here. So
No, we still are.
this pertains to the whole raster. This pertains to this quadrant right here.
Yes.
So everything in here, this is this, this is this, this is this.
Yeah.
This is this, and that is what makes sense, right? So not as simple as some of our other models, but it can handle complexity really well. Here's our ASCII grid. There's actually, if you want to check out this source, there's a great little explanation of ASCII grids on Stack Exchange with some linked information on them too. So you've got a grid image here. What type of raster is this? Discrete or continuous? Continuous. So we have some values stored in our raster that are not zeros and ones. They pertain to numbers. We don't know what they are. We could be looking at elevation, precipitation, anything. But the point is, this is what your data look like in your raster, in your text file, because an ASCII is just a text file. First is a number of columns, number of rows. This sets the dimensions for your raster. In rows and columns, we're not talking any length measurements yet. X lower left corner, Y lower left corner are held next. So what's the origin of this raster? 0, 0. Yeah. So where's it going to come in on Earth? Where geographically is 0, 0? The center of what?
Art.
What?
Center of the art.
Center of the arc?
Art.
Art.
Earth.
Earth. Nice to meet you. No, no,
Is it the-
if we brought Z into account, maybe.
is that-
So nobody has brought data in that don't have a reference system?
Oh, yes, it's 0, that one.
Yeah, and where is that?
Literally,
The middle of the ocean. Yeah, it's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Africa.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and this is really important for you to understand. Because if you bring data in and your data are not in the right location, how the hell are you ever gonna fix your data if you can't even find them first? I don't know how many times I've brought my like 3D models or my elevation or surface models in from my like unreferenced lab work. And it's just out in the middle of the ocean. Now, it doesn't matter that it's out in the middle of the ocean because I'm not working in a reference system. I have a local reference system designed for the lab space that I'm working in. Everything's laser referenced, so it's really precise. But when I bring my data in, they're out in the middle of the ocean. You know what I do? I just turn off the base map and keep rolling because I already know everything's perfectly referenced. It's already got an associated cell size with it. I can take measurements right off my elevation models and I don't have to think twice. So cell size, that's where we're setting our resolution here. That's also where we're coming up with these numbers. What are these numbers pertaining to? Those are numbers that aren't actually stored in the raster going around the outside here. What do these numbers pertain to?
Value,
Sorry?
the value.
Nope. Roy?
the bit value.
Nope. If our cell size is 50, why do we have 25, 75, 125? Distance.
It takes the cell size and divides it by rows and columns, or the number of rows and columns.
We're kind of mulling around the answer here. We have Z values. What are we missing from our raster? What does a raster cell value pertain to in space? Yeah, yeah. And is it the entire cell? It can be, right? But we usually describe cell location in the center of the cells. And that's really important because if we're working with things like elevation models and you want to be able to calculate a slope, you have to know the resolution of your data so you can calculate the distance in between your Z values. Rise over run, right? So what's the center of this cell? Rena,
What are those numbers then?
what's the center of this cell?
The bold numbers, yeah.
You all just said it, right? One, X and Y location? Yeah. So is this X or Y? Y, yeah. What is this? Going across the top, X. So what is the XY location pertaining to 13 here that I'm pointing to? What are the coordinates? 25, 25. So then what if I asked you about this one? What would you say the coordinates are? XY coordinates? 275, 175. Or sorry, backwards, 175, 275. Yep. And so this is not something that's held in the raster. It's held in one place, not in your actual data. There, with reference to your origin. Because we could really shift this anywhere on the face of the earth just by adjusting these values right here. No data values important to know. Why?
Not to take into account those cells.
Perfect. Yep. So you know to completely disregard those in any analysis that you do. I'm going to give you some data for this exercise that you're going to do tonight. They are really nice data. They're not perfect though. There's no data values that are tucked in there that do not pertain to the outcomes that I want to see. So why would you stand up a product that has no data in it when you could just ignore it and focus on the important parts? What happens when a remote sensing sensor goes bad? You get bad data. You get unusable data. So this is a way of, creating a quality control data set so you know whether or not your data are any good in the first place. How about in terms of formatting of rasters? Anybody ever bring a raster into GIS and it's got some like black border around it? Why is that? Huh? Yeah, but why can you see it? Mistakes. On whose end, Avi?
Sensor error.
No way. You can see it because the user hasn't set the no data value yet. So if you ever get that, it happens when you're working in ASCII data format a lot. You need to go in and actually tell the symbology in ArcPro, since we've all worked in ArcPro, which data value to acknowledge as no data. And if you do have that black border, because it happens a lot in remote sensing imagery where our images are tilted based on the orbit of satellites. But we can't map anything about the orientation in a format like this. It's simple X, Y, and resolution. So that's why we include that border, so we can keep an orientation that is completely vertical, but we have to pad our data sets in no data values in order to account for the spaces in those areas where there's a difference between this and this. Everybody get what I'm saying, Rena?
What are the not bold numbers? Like, are they just arbitrary numbers or?
Not bold numbers?
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting to now.
Okay.
So these babies over here, those are your actual data. So that's what's held down in this portion. So -9999, no data. Boop. NA is what we get in our actual raster. So no representation from those values.
Like those numbers don't mean like a color necessarily.
Huh? No, those colors are setting the color. That's what we visualize in our raster is the actual data. And we can have multiple bands. So if you're doing multi-spec, each band can have an individual raster band. Data values will vary highly depending on the bits of your sensor, and the complexity and sensitivity of the data that you can capture. So this is a very primitive open source raster format. If you're doing any sort of Python programming, you might have experienced ASCIIs before. That's where I've seen it, just going back and forth between like open source stuff and the proprietary softwares that I work in. So vector data are coordinate based. So we're plotting the structures of our vector data based on the coordinates. They're discrete, finite in space. They don't have a resolution. So, they can be described as infinite resolution. You can shift a vector at infinitesimally small units. Which is why I think they're becoming a little more popular, because we are having a better, success rate at mapping really precise phenomena. And that's important when you're dealing with water, because water will find the smallest crack and it will exploit it until failure. Whatever you're dealing with just breaks apart. So vector data, points, lines, polygons represents real world features and their accurate extents. We've already hit pretty heavily on some examples pertaining to hydrology, networks, roads, trails, both examples of things that can be mapped as lines, polygons, typical typically map features like lakes. Political boundaries are a huge one. National parks could be another example. Points, manhole covers, something that can be mapped as a point or probably a polygon, depending on what the point of your data set is. Tree locations, going back to our tree example. Trees could probably be treated either way as well. Just depends on what you're doing. If you want to find like the volume of water that falls on a tree, would you use a point or a polygon or a line to model the tree? Polygon, yep, because you need an area stored within. You could calculate that area and then transfer it to a point, but that information is fundamentally going to come from your polygon. Cities are an interesting one. Cities, another one we can handle as points or polygons. Depends on the purpose again. What are some cases where it's important to map the whole area of a city? So, i.e. using a polygon.
Urban expansion.
Urban expansion, yep. Anybody, other ideas?
Population density.
Population density, yep. And then when we're mapping cities, when would it be useful to use points?
Still the location.
Yes, yeah. So if we're doing a meta study of cities, you know what a meta study is? Takes many different examples into account. So if we're looking at, the population of cities in the entire US, is it worth mapping them by polygons when some of the cities that you could potentially map would be invisible in their polygon form? No, it makes more sense to handle that meta level mapping using generalized features such as points, not including the level of detail that a polygon would require. Vector data, always, it says usually, it's always associated with tabular data. This is known as the attribute table. We open it up, look at them all the time. You better be used to opening attribute tables. As you've heard me say a couple times already, knowing your data is super, super important, and you're never going to know your data if you can't look at the attribute table and identify what you're seeing. So you might need to go grab the metadata to help you explain what is in an attribute table, but that is where we come in here, is being a master of the data that we're working with. These values typically hold other attributes about what we're modeling. So what were some possible attributes in our tree databases? Let's focus on our data product right now, our tree health data product. What are some attributes that could go within that? What? Tree species?
Tree height.
Tree height? Yes, yes. Others? Let's go.
Diameter.
Diameter at breast, right? Anything else? It's a tree health data set. How about a health index? Right? What about our management plan? Last treatment date, treatment, organic, non-organic pesticides. We could have it all in that data set. We could handle it other ways too. We could have those attributes stored in different data sets, and we could create relationships between our data sets. It's all up for you to decide. It's up for you to decide, and I guess I should also add, it's also up for you to be able to justify why you made that decision. Attribute tables look like this. It's no secret that they hold information about vector data sets. Geometry information is usually not visible in here. We do get some sense of shape sometimes in our attribute tables here, but the shape type is what is known as a token if you've taken coding or intro to programming. So that's kind of hidden in the background is the shape type. And what the shape type does is sets the model for how location is stored within our data sets. So this is Anybody want to take a guess of what type of data set this is? I say guess, you could probably just use your eyeballs too.
Vector, polygon.
Vectors, polygons, what is the data set that we are looking at here? Medical conditions.
Yeah, this is.
Damn, I hope I don't have moraine plain. Hear that's super bad.
I definitely read that.
The types of rocks.
Types of rocks.
That's the geological data describing the land.
Oh.
Surface geology.
Yeah.
That's why I say use your eyes. Because I'm sure you could probably look at like a data set and, I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell me what it is, because these are really, really complex data sets. And this is just one window of Earth. This is the near subsurface. So this isn't necessarily your soil type, but this a lot of times sets the parent material for your soil types. So this is surface geology. So this brings into account erosion over time, not in like rate numbers, but in presence or absence. So in areas, it signifies glacial geology is really tightly close to that. That's why we see things like moraine plain, glaciolacustrine delta, organic plain, glaciofluvial hummocky. Yes, those words mean something to me. When I hear moraine plain or moraine hummocky, that says to me that it formed at the end of a glacier. And that's significant because it's really, I mean, it is a very interesting exercise to try and map the spatial extents of glacial pulses over history. It helps us understand how Earth's surface responds to climate change and natural climate variations that we have to live with. Can you imagine if we eventually trigger that tipping point in the climate where there's a negative response that sends us back toward an ice age? Wouldn't it be nice to know the areas that you might have to deal with miles of glacial ice? Could you imagine the city of St. Louis being plowed over by miles of ice? Yeah, well, it's happened before in history. St. Louis just wasn't here. So, I mean, it's a really interesting question to ask people because we focus on the negatives of like climate change, which are, I mean, what's like right in front of us. But there's a lot of things that we don't understand fully. And one thing that we do understand about climate cycles is you can easily go into a negative feedback loop where the overpresence of one substance triggers the opposite response. So in that nature, we have too much carbon in the atmosphere right now. As that's sequestered into rocks and those rocks eventually go underground into volcanoes, carbon-rich rock is super explosive. It sends up all kinds of ash into the atmosphere. Ash blocks out the sun, cools the atmosphere, sends us into an ice age. It's happened before. So these are attributes pertaining to our surface geology. I was just talking about what we can do with the data product. So this is, I mean, a unit. We have to be able to break this up into space because we're mapping a, I could talk about this. I have a real problem with the discrete mapping of features like this. Because when you get out into the real world, there's a lot of natural mixing that goes on. So if you ever hear me use the term fuzzy boundaries or fuzzy relationships, I would feel much more comfortable in modeling some things using fuzzy boundaries rather than a discrete boundary. Fuzzy boundary gives you some transitional area between those two neighboring attributes or entities or features. And it's important for you to think about, because, I mean, as scientists, you should be also questioning the methods that we use. Because there certainly are better ways of doing things, and we know that damn well. So keep extra things like this in your mind moving forward through this class and through your research. We can also have geographic coordinates stored in the tables. Anybody have an example where you store coordinates in the tables? My example pertains to dam locations. I do a lot of work with the USAC dam database. They don't share their data in geographic format. It's a CSV format that you download. So there's coordinate information not held within a shapefile or a feature class. It's just held within the table. And we can create the spatial data from that. There's a tool in any GIS software that you use for it. Otherwise, when we do have data stored in spatial formats, we assume one model or another. The two models are called the spaghetti model and the topological model. Anybody have a clue which we most frequently use these days?
Spaghetti.
Oh. We use the topological model these days. Anybody have any idea who created these models?
Was it William Spaghetti?
William Spaghetti. Nah. Anybody know the founder of Esri?
Jack Danger.
Yeah, Dangerman created the spaghetti model. That's what he was originally famous for. And he carried that to start his own company and still run that company. And this isn't even a good data model. we found a better one. But it's the understanding of how to map things in space that fundamentally what Jack Dangerman did when he was early in his career. So this is an example of the spaghetti model. So our first line of the spaghetti model identifies a vertex. So A here pertains to a point. Vertex, vertice, all points, right? Yep. So here's point A. What is next on the line below A? 2 and 4.7. What are those? I want you to be able to draw these associations without me giving them to you. Yeah, exactly. No, you're dead on, Vishal. Coordinate 2, coordinate 4.7 correlates to the location of A. So B here is the identifier for our second feature. What is feature B? I'm giving you the same exercises that I have to go through when I pick up other people's teaching materials and try and turn it around for you all.
It's the point in relation to A.
Is it? B is a feature in that graphic. It's a line. Yep. So what then are these values? First, tell me how many vertices or nodes does this line have? I heard somebody count to 4. That would be correct. Victor held up 4. Why do you say 4?
4 points.
You have 4 sets of coordinates. So if we connect the points, we make a line. So what are these numbers pertaining to?
Coordinates of the polygons.
The polygons?
The points.
Points, yes. Or the vertices of our line. So then what's C here? A polygon. And we follow the same exercise for the polygon. Yep. So we have an identifier for each of these features and their coordinates. Based on the arrangement of those coordinates, you can tell internally, not like internally in our interior bodies, but from the data held in the shape, you can tell if it's a point, because if it's a point, we expect 1. If it's a line, we expect at least 2 coordinates, and those coordinates shouldn't loop back around to close. See those? They're the same, right? Yeah, so spaghetti model requires closure of the feature. And that's how we dictate the type of the feature. Topological model labels the arcs. What are arcs?
Sections of the code.
Sections of the code? Nah.
Is it an angle from a?
Subsection. An arc, yeah, in a geometry term, that could be acceptable.
Okay.
I'm thinking like fundamental geometry though, not like geometry of putting geospatial data on the map. Avi, what did you say? Subsections. Subsections of what? Of a line, right? Because when you have, I mean, a line in GIS, what's it actually called? Polyline. Why is it a polyline? Yeah, it's made up of a bunch of different parts called arcs. These arcs connected by vertices known as nodes. So designating arcs and from node and to nodes. So the nodes are the locations. These nodes have geographic coordinates associated with them. These are just their identifiers here. So the topological model here says that arc A is connecting node 16 to node 17. So here's A, here's 16, here's 17. What's held in the background here is the geographic location of these points. That's actually why, anybody ever wonder why like shape files have 6 subsidiary files? Yeah, so one of those files actually holds the coordinates, and that's kind of invisible to us. It's encoded in the data set, so you could open it, and it would just be all kinds of special characters. But there is that geographic information somewhere in your spatial data. And then here's how polygons are built. Here, the polygons are just a bit different. We're noting the geographic feature, or I mean the polygon. So polygon B is comprised of arcs 1, 3, and 5. What are we missing here?
End node.
Yes, the nodes that comprise the arcs. So you can kind of picture this. There is a topological model within a topological model for building polygons. Because not only do you need to know the polygon and what arcs pertain to it, you need to know the nodes, what arcs those nodes pertain to, and their geographic location. So we can kind of think in that nature that there is an arc or a polyline model held within our polygon model. Vector versus raster, some trade-offs here. Vector data, smaller file size, higher precision. We talked about the ability to move in infinitesimally small increments. I guess we do have that capability with rasters, but typically when we collect raster data, those data, they pertain to something that is finite in space. And you don't want to just go shifting that. Distinct files rather than groups of bands, good for vector. I mean, some people have issues with working with banded data, especially when you're trying to process down to a single data product. there's always the ability to use both too. It's easy enough to extract a certain range of values from a raster set and present those as a vector data set. So if you do a bunch of classification mapping and you want to focus on one specific class within your data, you can extract that to vector and present that as your product. So that way your customers don't get bogged down in looking at all of the extra crap that's in your classification, and they can just focus on those infinitesimally accurate, discrete areas that are highlighted in your vector data. Raster calculator, one of the primary tools for processing raster data. I have elevation and land cover stored in here. Can always be discrete or continuous. Increased functionality for map algebra in the case of overlapping rasters. Important to note that the resolution, if you're doing any raster calculator work, resolution should be consistent between your rasters. Any questions? We're just about done here. Rena? Raster calculator is a processing tool. It is available in both. This is QGIS is what you see up here. It's also available in ArcPro or ArcMap, whatever you're using. What does it do? It does algebra for raster data. So generally you type in an expression and we can evaluate that expression. So this expression here is doing what? Yeah, exactly, Vishal. What are you gonna say, Juan?
Doing the, how do you call that? Like how? Never mind.
Okay, no, that's good, because Vishal, you got it spot on. All we're doing here is we're going from metric to feet, metric to US standard. What's this say?
Greater or equal,
Sorry, Supriya?
greater or equal,
Greater than equal to what? To 0, right? So what are you saying?
just elevation.
Yeah, where the elevation is greater than 0.
So that works like if statement.
Yep. You can work these into any raster calculator. Yep.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's I mean, if you're interested in this sort of stuff, there's a lot of different cool functions that you can apply right in the raster calculator to evaluate different kinds of statements. Some are really simple, like if-else statements, and others get more complex. Yep.
These like stay in the data, kind of like as an expression.
So it is output as any processing tool would output a raster. So for your B project, give you an example, when you ran your classifications, you got a separate raster output, right? So it's the same way with this. We're not manipulating existing data ever. We're just making another data set, a product from our tool or our function. You'll be doing this in your assignment this week, actually. There's 3 or 4 different tools that you can use in ArcPro to do this. I'm not going to give you any advice on them. Okay. Data management basics. How are we doing on time? We're doing okay. So some basics of data management. No secret that we're here to organize spatial data. It can be for a couple different purposes: inventorying, querying, conducting quality checks, handling spatial analyses, and of course, making maps. Spatial data management is different from just data management because everything has a location. Some of the databases require that location is updated automatically, so that how we treat location is quintessential to what we do in here. And that's why it's different than other data management classes, because they don't necessarily deal with location at the same level we do. Geodatabases can have topological rules. Now, we just talked about a topological model. A topological rule is completely different. A topological rule might say something like a river channel must be contained within a watershed spatially. So we can use topological rules to do quality assessment in our databases by making sure that people entering data in our databases are putting them in the correct locations. Because if you send, let's picture you have a mapping team at your disposal. You're going to send them out to do your mapping. You probably want those data in the correct locations. So if you're sending them out to X watershed, you want to restrict their data to that watershed. So they're not entering their data in a completely inappropriate location. That's the way a topological rule functions. We can set lots of different rules pertaining to data type, certain operators for manipulating data. And like the example I just gave, we're going to talk a lot about quality in here. Some basic operators that help us keep our databases managed well, known as the CRUD operators, for the creation of new data, the retrieval of existing data, the updating of data that we already have in our database, and the deletion of old or redundant data. How might we do some of these things? What geospatial skills have you picked up so far that you could potentially manage some data with? Looking at you all who were in programming last semester.
Can you reword the question?
What skills have you obtained in your life that would help you do any of those CRUD operations? More specific, in programming, what could you do? We covered it in an entire unit in Intro to Programming last semester. Camilla?
I can draw a polygon on ArcGIS.
You can draw a polygon.
The creation of the vector model.
Creation, yes.
I can use the extract information through Python codes retrieval. I can open the state file and the attribute table and add some data, or I can do.
What do you use to do that? You do it manually?
I can do it on ArcGIS using spatial joint. Is that?
How would you do it in Python? Cursors. Boom. That's what I'm looking for.
And I can do the same as.
What's a cursor, Avi?
Well, it's the marker, the module, I guess.
It's a marker. What type of marker?
Determines where the start and the end is of the data set.
We might be thinking about different cursors. So if we have, say, a search cursor, what's that search cursor going to do?
Iterates.
That's
And
the word.
all of the cursors do that, actually. They iterate, they can update, they can search, they can.
Yeah, so cursors are iterative. Python, I guess I'll call it a function for a lack of a better term, that's going to iterate through your attribute table. And you can search for specific attributes in your data set or your database for that matter. You can update rows, say if you have a newer record that's going to replace an old record, you can update it. You can delete redundant data that way. Specifically in my work, I used an update cursor to delete features that are small. So if you have an area that's held in the attribute table, you send a cursor, an update cursor through that attribute table, searching a specific field within your attribute table. It evaluates a clause So if area is over 500 square meters, delete it, or under 500 square meters, delete row, del row. So this is what I'm talking about here. There are also other tools that are built in our nice proprietary software that we drive around like a Ferrari not knowing it, that does all this for us. I say that because, I mean, we could be using QGIS where there's, I mean, still the ability to do some cool things, it's just not as streamlined as our nice shiny Ferrari that we drive when we're using our Pro. My old advisor used to joke about that all the time. Said that our ArcMap, ArcPro, Esri products are like a Ferrari, open source GIS, kind of like a Pontiac Fiero, which is also dating his age. Pontiac Fiero is a car that Pontiac released back in the 80s that's inspired by how a Ferrari looks, but it's still a Pontiac. Yeah.
So the cursor like a tool, or is it like how you use like a?
A cursor is specific to Python. In Model Builder, we do have the ability to create a cursor to update tables for us. In some of the tools, the development of the tools in ArcGIS Pro that I'm mentioning, like there's like update data tools for database management. Those have cursors worked in them that are going to do the same thing. One neat exercise that we actually did last semester was having you all program cursors into a tool. That's exactly how the Esri tools are developed to. So when something is updating your data, there's just a cursor that's programmed in the background. Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I guess I'm just like, I didn't take programming, so like, will I need to know how to?
You'll be okay. You'll be okay. So spatial data management, as you can imagine, as like pretty much every other tech field over the years, has diversified. We're not just operating on local machines anymore. We have cloud databases, cloud servers that we handle our databases on. Things like Google Earth engine is known as a cloud database. ArcGIS Online. Same sort of thing. We're working on somebody else's server when we upload data to ArcGIS Online. We can also do some analyses too on ArcGIS Online, right? Those aren't happening on our computers. We're just clicking buttons on the internet. Those are happening on Esri servers. I have no clue where those are. So in database management, our logical files, logical files are things that are set to dictate how data in files is displayed. That makes sense to anybody? Logical files could be those files that are just there to support symbology. So you have a data set, it's in your database. Do you, as the owner of this database, do you want to go in and every time you make a map, you have to set the symbology for the same stinking layer over and over again? No, you don't want to. So we can have a logical file in there that has a symbology attached to it. And in our database, we can set a rule in our database that this data file is symbolized using this symbology file. So that way, when somebody downloads your database and looks at your product, it's already symbolized the way that you want it to be. Because that's really important to how your message gets across. The symbology aspect of it. Schemas. Schemas are great. Schemas are the blueprints for geodatabasing. So this is a very simple example here. But it tells you the structure of the data being held in a database. So we've got an employee database here. So that is a table, right? What do you think those items are held within the employee table?
Employee data. Personal information.
Employee data, more descriptive, please. It is employee data. use our terminology that we use in the geospatial world. So if this, if this is a table, tables hold fields. Fields hold what? Attributes. Good work, I hear. So, what's department then?
Another field.
What?
Another field?
Another field or another table? Yeah. Database organization is pretty interesting. It is kind of counterintuitive. Fundamentally speaking, from how we approach our data. We typically take a unidirectional approach. This goes both ways. We have our employee database, but we want to be able to analyze the employees at the department level. So we're going to have a department data set as well. What's going to be held in here, we're going to have some unique things that we can join in the table or relate in the table. So we're pulling department ID from employee over here. This pertains to the department that they're actually in. So this is nice because we can go in here, what if the department name changes? Then we update it in one place. We don't have to go into this table and update this because this already pertains with our new updated ID over here. Project works the same way. We've got a unique item for both, or a unique field and attributes for both the project table and the employee table. So the same thing can be said for updates. The structure works both ways, not just trickling down in terms of what's being held. So the schema is typically stored in XML. What's XML? It's a pain in the ass, is what it is. Because a lot of times when we're working with the schemas of databases, we either want to be able to visualize the structure of a database, or the other major benefit. Well, I guess I'll say there's two. There's two major benefits. Sharing the structure of your database. Now, Arc Pro is not sophisticated enough to read, share schemas easily, but we can share XML schemas into other softwares in which you can really easily create something like this. My experience with this has been just horrible. So hard, so difficult to do. Working in really old software because there's not a great method for doing this these days. A lot of the work that we do, that we will do in here, we're gonna do some diagramming just by hand. But there are automated methods of doing the diagramming. Formatting is so annoying when you get into that. If it isn't formatted correctly, you might get the tables, the connections don't exist. And if you're missing that fundamental aspect of it, it's a lot of work to go back in there and build those relationships in your database. So the schemas help in sharing the structure of your database with others. Probably people that don't have the specialty of location that you all will have. So, if you have like a database manager that might be like part of your project, you could handle the spatial data, but the database manager, you would need to be able to communicate the structure of your database with them if they're going to integrate it into a larger database. The XML schemas also, importantly, allow us to log changes in our database. So after you build a database, it's done. The first step is to start working on version 2. So the XML schemas, you can actually put them in a change detection software and see where the changes occurred in your database. So today, we're going to start assignment 1. We're going to have a little bit of time for this right now. Essentially, it's gonna be just a ground level workflow on importing data into a database and making a product. The product that you are going to make me, I'm your customer, you need to fulfill my order. I want a map of sea ice change, extent change, okay? Just the extent of sea ice over January of 2021. I supply you with data, it's on you to make it happen. Use Arc Pro, raster calculator, or what they call it, map algebra, raster algebra, whatever. You can also just use the minus tool. But the point is, I want to see a map layout that describes to me the change in sea ice extent over the month of January 2021. There is a couple, well, there are a couple slides here at the end that give you some information on tools you might use. You need to learn how to create a database if you don't know how to create one. There's a slew of ways to do this. Not just one. I like to joke around and say that there are 5 different ways to do anything in GIS. I joke, but that's probably actually true. So there's a couple different workflows. They are different for vector data, for raster data, and tabular data. Now, I like to think the tabular data are just vector data. So it's not like you can't use one tool to do another job. There's just specifically designed tools that you can use that vary by the type of data that you're dealing with. So there's some data on Canvas for you. I give you 2. So keeping this nice and simple, we're not looking at like every day or the entire month or anything like that. Just the beginning of the month and after and end of the month. You're going to import those into the geodatabase. Create your database in a folder that makes sense to you. I organize all my data by week. It's going to evolve throughout the semester. And lots of times in here, your projects for 1 week will build on what you've done for the week before. So it's really important for you all to be able to go back and pull the data from the prior week or your work from the prior week. So your data management technique in here is completely up to you, but it's really important. You're going to import your data. I give you a no data value there. What does that no data value say to you? Does it give you any background information on the raster data?
RGB,
RGB?
255.
Could be. Yeah, number of bits. Yep. I ask that because there are details of these tools that you need to respect. So I say it's important to get to know your data. I'm not just talking about vector data. It's also important that you know your raster data. Because when you go to import these rasters, what happens when it asks you how many bits your raster has? What are you going to do? Guess? Guess and check? Because it goes all the way from 1 bit to like 32-bit rasters, and you have like 8 different selections that you can make. There's also signed and unsigned rasters too. So where are you going to go to find how many bits your raster has? The metadata. Yeah, so get to know your data some. Don't email me with questions. How many bits? So I got tons of emails last year when I did this. You all have the skills. I know you do. You know where to go. You all went through Intro to GIS and learned how to go into the metadata. I've got the math expression there. I guess, sorry, taking a step back up. For each raster, you're going to need to do a little bit of management work on the values. I told you that there's some bad data in here. I only want 3 values held in your final raster. I'm a poor little customer. I don't know anything about these data. I'm out in the dark, wandering around, and I'm scared. I only want to see the water that froze, the water that remained water, or the ice that remained ice, and the ice that thawed. I don't, like I said, I don't know anything about remote sensing data, so I don't need to see values that are going to confuse and scare me away from giving you my money. Because if there's uncertainty, I'm not going to give you my money. So 3 things. Water that froze, water that remained water, or ice that stayed as ice, AKA no change, and ice that thawed. I have some symbology requirements for you here too. Like I said, I'm scared. I don't know anything about spatial data, remote sensing. I don't like ice. Ice is not one of the main driving factors of my passion here in remote sensing. It's not. So I need you to use symbology that makes perfect sense to my untrained eyes. I think water that froze as blue, light blue, this is going to be the only thing that I care about, really. Because if we're in January, should we be gaining sea ice or losing sea ice?
Well, I would hope you would gain sea ice.
Me too. January is still at like the height of winter, especially polar regions.
Yeah.
So the -1 is going to be light red. So this is decrease in ice. So blue is increase here, decrease, bad, red. And no fill for 0. So I should see some sort of base map that helps me understand the location of your data product without the data product covering up my reference locations. Should we see sea ice form on land? Huh? No. So you can do your own quality checks, quality assessments as you're doing this. Because I don't care how you get to the product. What I do care is that your product is correct and that you can do it. Your customers, generally speaking, won't care how you get to the correct answer, as long as you come to the correct answer and you can confidently say it's the correct answer. So use your skills that you've picked up. You know where ice should be forming, where ice shouldn't be forming. So if you're seeing values of 1, 0, 1, or probably 1 and -1 that are over land, you know something's up with how you're handling your data. You can either go back, well, there's 2 ways to handle it. Either go back and figure out what's wrong and try and redo the calculation so your values come out right. Or you can try and clean up your mess after your calculation. So that's a matter of you interpreting what errant value on your map pertains to which value your customer, me, is actually looking for. So I want to lay out for this, visualize your results. I'm also asking you to do a little bit of math. Because I want the area of sea ice change, not just a percentage. That should be in something that I can understand. So if you have data that are stored in meters, it's not really going to make much sense to express your sea ice measurement in meters, because it's probably going to be a really big jumbly number that'll just kind of float right over your stupid little helpless customer's head. That's the way I want you to treat me in this. Any questions? Export a PDF, put your extra information right in your PDF, like your area calculation would be great to see. How do you calculate the area of a single raster cell? One.
Like for example, if it's a 30-meter resolution, you go 30 times 30.
Yeah, a resolution squared. Resolution squared, right? Yep. So if you take the resolution of your data, square it, there's the area of one raster cell. Because when you go into your raster data, after you run the raster calculator, you should have a count of cells for each value. The math part is going to take you from the count to the area represented by the count of those cells. When we're working in raster world, everything is cell in cells. So I mean, our sea ice may like follow a more natural curve, but our raster data are going to come out something like this. So not perfect. That's why we use vector data for things if we want to be perfect, because we're always limited by the resolution of our rasters. On that note, that's all I've got for you today. The rest of the time is yours. Get to work. Thank you. Also some layout requirements there. Emily, you got a volleyball coach yet?
Yes,
Yep.
she starts.
Any word about quality or anything, or where they're coming from?
Serious.
Okay, nice. Do you appreciate that or what? Okay, cool. Well, that's good.
Keeps on yelling at my kid format. Error 999.
Yep. Yeah. It is. Under that. Good luck. It's 9999 can file location.
Immediately after.
It could also be calling for like a output file format. We'll see it. Hey, is Thursday still okay for you? At 2? All right, cool. See you then.
I think the problem though is that like the entire watershed, so many things going on. I don't know.
Yeah.
You guys should.
Yeah.
It could be worth looking at stuff. It is. That area where.
Are they?
The only, way that we would really know is if.
Yeah. So, can you open the attribute
And
table,
like
delete values?
analysis of it to see if there was any significant values that I don't get out of that, but I'm trying to think of another way.
The columns not have any.
Which I thought was interesting, because you can like that.
Besides
There's the
whatever.
And it doesn't really impact like
The only other thing clients would also have.
their own data.
Yeah, pretty negligible.
I'm trying to think
of small, but.
Oh,
I might go back around and mess with it.
and also other issues I've ran into when I do this sort of thing is the data set gets locked up for editing when it goes into the calculator. It doesn't release the data set. So you can edit it. Because that's the way I order, I guess. So try creating a copy, just I mean, straight from the
Need to ask.
contents pane. You can just right click export features. And that bar explain
Wondering.
and try and create a duplicate and then see if you can manipulate.
That was like the whole point of the design was to, flatten the land and then.
And the other, we can also do masks too with rasters. Remember that.
Okay.
So that would essentially mask out all the values from
Observational video data that are going for.
back and forth, just right over down the data.
More thousands of times.
Hypothetically, like,
And I don't know, yeah.
go into it.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'll continue
Yeah.
brainstorm, trying to figure out.
That's weird. No, that's new information on it. Since Wausau is your monetary source, since you're on contract under him, he
Necessarily.
behaves as your idea. So and his signature goes on it first and then it comes to me.
Barring,
So, and he is being a stickler about what people are being able to apply.
embankment,
So.
there
Get his approval
haven't
first.
been at.
But he might, because, explain to me specifically what you're trying to do again.
Landscape.
You're gonna bring your,
I think.
or intro CIS credits from another institution into your.
Unless they added the huge,
Okay.
like wire,
He has.
like electrical wire
typically
posts that are
Okay.
double the height, you know, that the electrical company did.
Definitely like construction rates going on elsewhere in the watershed, further upstream.
I was thinking like, you know, how you were talking about, a gauge that was like, say. I guess we could, if we wanted, it all depends on how Ryan can.
The
Yeah,
thesis
that's
credit.
what I'm
really
Okay.
separate from required.
If you were to have a comparison between.
Is it me?
Upstream
I have an
gauges,
issue.
like,
Yeah.
the next one immediately downstream. And then.
Yeah, so
compare that
your thesis
to-
credits, straight count on each.
Don't do it on
credits.
I believe.
See
If
if
we open it,
the,
So we should be able to apply your research topics at any of the field.
do that.
Yep, absolutely.
Chart. Use your file location, name it whatever you want.
maybe the.
So it's not
average, or
research
maybe
topics,
it's like an
it's
exponential curve.
it's not worked into the increasing. Yeah, because it's not a formal requirement,
Discharge.
but it's
Um,
it's at least like a good class for people to take.
I mean.
Tired.
Well, it's kind of like what you were talking about with, like, you know,
Right, what I
comparing.
was saying. is
Oh,
like,
so those are separate. Those can't.
yeah,
sure.
between what it is at one gauge and the next gauge.
Mhm.
But there's also like lots of development happening upstream, so,
I've never even seen it. And so everyone's to blame.
right, how do you say, I don't know.
Hey, I'm all for
I
blaming
think
all
that
the
you can't
industries.
say, you might not be able to say that it's attributed to one.
Or.
Oh, no, I could
Okay.
blame all the industries. That would be fine,
You could
but then they
That
would
would
get
get about transferring a course in for required course. Yeah, yep, okay, cool, then shouldn't be a problem.
It's lots
Yep,
of-
you got
so
that.
much development happening, like a lot of MSU. So you might have to
Yep.
kind of summarize all of it
Yeah,
and say it could be attributed to any of these three
I
sources.
think the idea came around in 2018, but they didn't start working on it.
Okay, cool.
Until like,
So research topics is gonna fulfill 50-10.
I'd have to look. at
Thesis
their,
research is separate.
Because they.
I believe so, and we can look at this in more detail.
That means more than 30 credits.
Yeah, there are a little more information, really the background.
This is great. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Let's look at.
I'm just trying to, I'm thinking of this sort of. Decently
automated system.
substantial.
There.
And not kind of circumstantial,
Right.
kind of statistical evidence.
If it does not have any census requirement here. And it says setting a.
But yeah,
Work from here and go on 6 reasons.
Oh, you're walking.
He's rolled.
That's how much.
So how many have they now?
Survive.
That- I just wanted to go on these evening classes.
Yeah, so 12 are coming from electives, that leads 18 that come from the requirements, right?
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
This is counted as the 18, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. This is-
Yeah,
this-
my
this is
brain
credit,
doesn't think necessarily the most.
But as a thesis student, I have to take 6 reasons.
Yeah, no,
Not here.
Yeah.
right.
And
I'll let you.
That's a good question. I'll,
and if I have to take.
Yes.
You just have to mess with the content catalog.
That's a little bit required is 36.
Yeah.
30.
well, there's a difference between how we treat curricular credits and research credits.
I believe this will not thesis track because.
Right, so then how we treat research credits is that, I mean, the requirement is higher for research students. So you're not getting out of coursework because you're doing research. Yep. But so talk to Wasson about it, because I mean, ultimately it's up to him before it's up to me. This is important for us to know and understand, and also we take any issue up the chain of command at the university to the associate dean, and she gives us input on everything. And it's typically better than the knowledge that Wasson has, because
Don't do that, you add it to your pepper.
so, talk to Wasson about it, see if he's cool with you using your research credits as electives or whatever. And I mean, he's been doing a nice job of working with students.
Oh, okay.
to be
That's,
able to-
okay, now I got it, yeah.
Okay.
It was on the. wrong thing.
Mariah, yep,
It's easier, because then you can.
That projection look right to you?
Yeah, exactly one, then you can.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
all right, cool.
So, first thing. When I was doing last week's assignment for GeoViz, I made use of all of my credits for.
Like all 1,000 of them?
I guess because I used geocoding to.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it
Was
was.
it a gigantic paper set?
Wow.
All right.
Oh,
I can do more.
I would appreciate that. I don't really know if it's gonna
don't
interfere
have to worry.
with what's going on, but,
well, I
I
mean,
feel like it yelled at me. and-
Regardless, so I can give you more, so you can do more cool stuff.
Okay.
If you do any more geocoding, it'll take credits. That's, I mean, if you use like the cloud, like imagery servers that they have now, it takes credits. Yes.
Question.
Okay.
Got a shape file question. When you ask. It's a business now.
Yeah.
Yes, and.
Yep.
How to differentiate together in one. How do we go to model?
So, yeah. So terrain is a little bit different. Terrain is usually not referenced to a relative zero. When we're saying elevation, it's elevation above mean sea level. And that's really important to understand because the elevation is tied to a geoid model. It's a gravity model of the entire Earth, which is how we dictate mean sea level. Yep, so like a terrain model, that would be like an unreferenced model that you might get in the remote sensing lab, something that's not tied to a geoid.
They probably could look similar, but the height. It's given.
It would just be
that was not-
elevation. It wouldn't be
was not
elevation
referenced to the sea
relative.
level.
Yep, exactly.
That's one question. Second question, like, is that, you probably have done. Is it possible to? Like, well, because I could put it on 24, it's up to eventually Dr. Sagan's call.
Yep.
But I would go with the other, not how. Well, it is, how long does it?
Well, it's typically up to the student because our students seem to have a hard time presenting their work in the time that they have been allotted.
Do you want to
So
leave?
as long as you are adhering to the time that's allotted,
Rush you. No, it's okay. I don't know. I don't really either, so.
you haven't been to a dissertation here at SLU.
Thanks.
You gotta go to one before your own.
I know.
Yeah, you should have been going to like every dissertation defense that you've been here for. That's what I would,
No, I went to the math.
Yep.
Get in and get out, like, I didn't really know what I was doing.
yeah.
But 24 hours, but I want. I commission like 1 hour. Would not even. Whole 1 hour is for question.
Yeah, so if you do 45 minutes, that leaves 15 minutes for public questions. And our open access to the public, and then I give it an hour for us to.
You're on something.
And we can shorten that some. Maybe down to like 45 minutes, so we can have the last 15 to talk to you and decide and decide.
It specifically tells you.
Because I've started
It's
getting taken advantage of it, because I have to like submit the paper.
Even like you do
And
something.
I have to run off.
Which is CIP.
So,
If it's not
like,
CIP,
the student wants an answer to whether or not they've passed.
well, that sucks.
They don't get it
Completed.
because we can't stick to time.
I want to go home now.
So when you wanna practice, we can set up practice sessions for you. I'll organize groups of people outside of your influence
right, but it's like-
lab meetings. That is just open space for comment. And it's not meant to be like hurtful to you, but it's meant to really rip your work apart and give you some extra things to improve before your actual defense. This is completely normal. I did it in like a presentation setting prior to my defense, presented to the entire like ECS program and just asked people to just decimate.
Like
their
in
work.
quotes, any of these ice change, GDV.
So if I just.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like when you sat down here and gave me the presentation that you were gonna give at GeoRes 2 years
Sorry,
ago last year.
teach us any of this.
We'll do that sort of thing. For some feedback.
A little bit, just
Yeah, I was just.
just give me a little push.
I thought your text was very funny.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sitting here. I know how to use the Earth maps. I've learned on our phone, I don't want to.
Now it's looking right.
It's like in my little.
I'm sorry, yeah, yeah.
Database
No, I,
looking good.
my life is
Yeah, I know.
crazy, so. No, not at all, not at all. I was not.
Like highlighted. Why is it- Okay.
Yeah, no, I like Wassa, we have great conversations about these things. So,
Oh, you go to.
we understand. that we
Yeah,
need
maybe one of
each other
these.
and we have short memories to get over it. We work really well together.
We click on here and press control S.
Personally, I was like.
No.
It's private.
We're of the understanding that you're a pain,
Like
but
nice traditional
you are.
You're the-
You're a particular. There's
You wanna
nothing.
have your stuff optimally placed.
It'll prompt you if you try to do something else that's not safe. Save it.
Yeah.
Oh, I know, I didn't.
I feel bad for all the students. I sent.
Anytime I get over that.
No, then I just got.
No.
People were. I got mine figured out.
Okay. Yeah, that's everything's fine.
Right here, it's like.
All normal part of the
Save
happenings around here.
And yeah, I would like to
Okay,
have that.
I'm in it now. I've done it.
So that.
Yeah, I just finished
Okay.
mine too.
All right,
Change the map again.
Oh, do you have to do that?
You guys have to
Yeah.
do that?
How do you-
I don't know.
Yeah, but it was more of a brainstorming
Because
thing
he
about
wanted his
how
own
to
little
properly use
mind to be able to read
data
it.
to
So what do you?
properly place
Well,
line on
great.
Brentwood bound.
Okay,
Wait, can I, specific question?
Yeah.
go for it.
Why this?
Why that? How is your data being drawn on your map? What coordinate system is it being drawn in? It's that's an attribute of your map and not your data set, Rena.
Oh,
The right click map up there.
oh,
No, at the top of the conference pane.
oh.
Yep. There you go, down to the bottom,
That's right.
just the same way you check the raster properties of a raster. Should say something like coordinate system.
Yes.
What's it say there?
Web arcade or next day.
Yeah, what the hell's that?
The normal one?
The normal
I don't
one?
know.
No, so the web marketer is optimized for web mapping,
Usually I bring mine.
very basic.
I gotta make it the same one as this one.
So if we're picking coordinate systems for data, they usually design.
Yeah, that's on a track pad, I usually go to, well.
Where the data are.
Yeah.
So where are these?
Really what I'm asking was what's the difference between
Yeah, cause I sometimes.
this part.
If you just want to type folder in the search, it'll find all the polar coordinate systems for you. Yeah, so what's that? No.
Oh.
So what is that? Where did that come
Oh,
from? Why is it right at
it's
the
this one.
top?
This one.
Yeah, it's the coordinate system that the data came in.
Why did mine look like that, but then there's came on?
I have no clue. I have absolutely no explanation why GIS does certain things and why it doesn't do other things.
Just likes you better. So what happens if you don't set a no data value on something that has the like black outline. That would kind of like ignore that step, and do everything else you wanted to do.
Well, like I said earlier, you can try and clean it up after the product is produced, but that's on you to be able to interpret what those
You got the glasses on today.
are. But I mean, if you get rid of the no data values,
Like last week, I was
and you
like,
should have a pretty clean product when it comes to the numbers in terms of -1. But otherwise, you just have to be able to follow what growth, what sea ice looks like in your data and what.
I was talking about my own stuff, because I did not do that.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
Yeah, it's
then
like-
it's completely fine.
Okay.
Like for most things, like especially scientific
yeah,
products,
'cause
like
I had
it's
like
as
a,
simple as deleting something in like an Excel
Okay,
table later on as
perfect.
we're doing our reporting.
that's exactly what I did.
Yeah,
Cool,
yeah.
cool.
So it's, I mean, it's the same exact like. Same thing happens if you're deleting a row in an attribute table. It's just a table that
Yeah.
you're manipulating. So
Okay, cool.
whichever way you do it is fine. Yes, Roy. So we want to pin some blame on some people.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be really difficult to pin blame on one specific.
Oh,
Well, no, I'm, I mean,
Or I guess the whole like
No,
project itself. So
I blame a lot of
Shit,
people, but a lot of groups.
we're not blaming the people, it's blaming the project. We can do that, but I don't
So,
think.
because hypothetically, I thought we
Partly
needed
blaming
to do
Dave Dimmitt,
this
the mayor of Brentwood.
to change
The specific
the,
reason. The rest of it's
no
more
data
like the
value, but,
organization,
like-
and like the project and. Like regulatory agreement, and
That's
stuff like
fun.
that, but
Yeah.
honestly,
is
like,
that you're supposed to
feel
have already
like-
done this before?
you know,
Remember I said
if
to
they
you,
were to do
oh,
like
my
even
Oh,
their
yeah.
own data.
Sorry,
The point of the project.
I don't really know how to do
impact the land and
I'll
get
just think
all of
about
that
it
water
another
to
day.
In my intro class, we skipped everything to do with rasters.
Possible.
see,
So
we didn't touch anything in my intro
So-
class.
it
Yeah.
succeeds,
My darling advisor.
it's kind of like the
What's his
incriminating
part?
thing, because it's like they can't just be like, oh, let's.
That's
just
nice of
keep
you.
this off to the side and not really care
He's finally
about,
having
you
a
know.
meeting with me on
they- they
Thursday.
do their
That's
own
good.
risk assessment.
He doesn't
It's always
cancel it.
good.
So, you know, they.
Steve
they're
wanted
like,
to meet
oh,
with me
you know, we
again this week.
investigated Ourselves and found ourselves not.
So did he
guilty.
review a new one?
And so, but it's-
Basically.
but it would be, it is difficult.
I mean, it
to,
wasn't
like,
bad, it was like productive, but it was him telling me that he could get shit together again.
For them,
Just like.
that is the
Here,
problem.
we can. switch
So,
for a
you
little
know,
bit,
but
'cause I
then
think
how do
somebody
you,
needs to
like-
tell me to get my shit
And-
together
and-
for a little bit.
Yeah, well, his
You can have somebody that just
Point of
says,
this project. is to
Word,
drain
and
the lake
it's gonna be okay.
faster.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
You even
wanna
have
do
to like,
some
you know, all
hydraulic
these different random
modeling
assignments,
like
like
that, too.
trying to read about uploading.
I'm
theory.
I don't know if you have
contact
the-
with.
It seems I've been assigned a
Yeah,
project.
that was something
You
that I
know,
thought I was doing,
but
but
you do know Peter.
Literally the, right, has to be leaving class.
He knows how to do some
After
hydraulic
class,
modeling.
we were assigned
Doing hydraulic modeling.
projects.
Thesis project.
So
So you're not.
read into it, like all this hard work.
If you did want to do that.
Also, it's like, oh, we're gonna have one.
Because if the framework of what we would be doing is extracting some cross-section information from spatial data. I don't bet the spatial data is probably not even out there since this area is recently manipulated. So we need elevation data specifically. So the way I've done it in the past for my studies is go get in the stream and measure it using a rod and a laser. We don't want to do that. We don't have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So, like, in order to do that, we would need some LiDAR data. Which would have to go through the TGI pipeline into the data analysis or the data team, and they would have to assist us with it. That's like a big project.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in contact with Bob Chris, who.
Yeah, Bob's cool, dude.
Yeah,
Yep.
and, you know, as.
He's got some great stuff. I don't even know if you were around when he came to campus and gave us a really cool talk for EAS, I want to say last year.
No, I don't.
Yeah, but he would be really interested in.
No, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I've contacted him. He said, you know, that he was in California for obviously the floods there. But that he'd be back, you know, in February and,
Oh, cool.
and that, you know, he'd like
Well, he
to
is a
schedule.
therapist now, so he's
Yeah.
retired and gets the freedom to do whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah, but you know, so we're gonna schedule a good time for him to come down, see the creek
Yeah.
and then try to. Think of a good way to make it both as obvious as it already is, but also assisted with some raw data.
So I think a great way for you to approach this right now, so you can start making progress before you nail down a final like idea for your work, is to start doing background research.
Yeah, I've
So-
got
so-
an old newspaper.
No.
Not
We're
that
talking
far.
scientific research, not newspaper crap or like what was installed here. I want you to do research on what natural channel restoration looks like. Because there's a very well understood framework for naturally restoring a river channel.
Mhm.
Did they do this is the fundamental thing that we should focus on. Because that is just from a picture, you can dictate that. Because there's a natural channel form and an unnatural channel form. And I happen to know when you riprap line a channel, that's not a natural channel form. When you install riprap, it creates elevated shear stresses downstream of that area, causes erosion downstream. It's not natural at all. So from that framework, we don't even have to do any real true scientific work. Because that's what you have right now, is you have your circumstantial evidence, your pictures from your drone essentially.
Yeah, and then
And we
video.
can, and like you have a pretty good map now of like the area that you want to focus on.
Mhm.
Can you recommend like what a natural channel might look like in that circumstance?
Well, yeah,
Because that, I mean, that also helps us frame it, not to like, we're blaming you for this. But it gives them an alternative thing to think about and the ability to recognize themselves.
well.
I'm gonna share some work with you from a master's student who was in my lab at NDSU when I was a PhD student. He was doing, up in Fargo, there was a project of this, it was a drainage area next to the parking lot. And his specific project evaluated how long it took water to run off through this urban drainage basin. And that's kind of what we're gonna do here. We're gonna have like the scenario of, our natural channel, like what is that? What does a natural channel look like? And what did they do? And if we can put those right next to each other, that'll mean a lot to like the people who know nothing about this, or the people who sign off on projects like this.
Mhm. Yeah, because there's a lot of like hands-off, lenient, lackadaisical delegation that is just kind of like, all right, yeah, you go do it. And whatever, I don't really care, because the Great River Greenway, like rock embankment. Like I had called and contacted them, the people that I contacted, and I'm still trying to get in contact with the main people. They apparently had no idea what was going on with the project, and that they thought too that it was about like native plant restoration. I'm like, whoa, y'all funded it.
See ya.
Like. You either like, how could you fund it and then not know what's going on? That's either you just didn't care to oversee it at all.
Don't know anything, they're not educated on it. So
But
where do
then
they
why
even
would
start?
they do it? That's just incompetence.
Because they're.
I know, I know that's always the reason, but like, it's just so stupid.
It is, and it's really frustrating. So, and like, that's why we need to like approach this really like carefully, because the first thing that's gonna happen is like, these people are gonna think that we're blaming them. See ya. We're blaming them for screwing something up and.
Oh, well, I kind of am.
Yeah, but we're not gonna say that to them.
Well, no,
We're
not
gonna
yet.
Present it to them,
And
shove it in their face.
Yeah, just have the blame be like the logical conclusion that people would make, that you don't have to necessarily say like directly.
Yeah.
You would just be like, look at this. And then look at this.
Yeah.
And what?
So
do
I
you
think, well, and Roy, like it goes back to what you say, like the overall goal of the project was to just get water out of there as fast as possible. If that's the one thing, how they're evaluating that project, it very well could succeed by their design.
Well, yeah, we'll see, and the fact that it has succeeded means that it was like, it just fucked up everything else downstream. But it was a success for them,
Yep.
and but then it's about taking this idea of a success and being like, hey, where did the water go? Like, it's not out of sight, out of mind.
Yep. So, and I also think another important part of this is gonna be in like defining successes and failures aspect of it.
Yeah.
Because when we're doing a project like this, it may like succeed in one like aspect, but completely fails in another.
Well,
So,
I mean,
like,
but if the success, if like.
So I identify some different reasons why places are restored. And then we can list all those different reasons and say whether or not this one restoration project did that. So conveyance is how fast water is moved through the channel.
Mhm.
We can say, check, yes, it does that. Did it handle natural channel form? No, it didn't. Did it take native species into account? Maybe a little bit,
I mean, there's lawn grass.
in pretty interesting ways. We have stakes stuck in the ground right now.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
for the rock embankment, yeah, but for the Brentwood Bound, I mean, it's just lawn grass, though. You should like the kind of like project renders and like what they said, I mean, in the same like sentence that they're showing up it, they just lie like straight up, they're just like, oh yeah, native habitat restoration, floodplain restoration, and then they're like, it goes from trees to like a gentrified park, and I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, you can't say habitat and then do the, like, what? You made certain that there's no habitat to restore,
I
like,
took
what are you
a,
talking about?
I took an interesting, it was a natural resource management class, and we got talking about like, man, how do you restore a landscape? What do you restore it to?
Yeah.
And really, like, we've altered the landscape so much that there's absolutely no point in going back to the natural state of the landscape.
Yeah.
So what we talked about a lot in there was design and what we actually wanted the landscape to, how we wanted it to function, what
Yeah,
we
and a lot
wanted
of
it
the
to look
landscape's
like,
just
how we wanted to
permanently-
interact with it.
A lot of it's permanently damaged in the way that like any kind of, yeah, I don't know why they say, any kind of project like that, you know, they'll just be like, all right, we're gonna pop a few trees down grid style and bada bing, bada boom, restore.
Yep.
It's like, there's a little bit more to an ecosystem than that.
Yep.
But of course, you know, like, it's not like they're going to actually do that, you know, kind of effort. But yeah, I mean, it's just the fact that, well, I just hate greenwashing, but also it's that issue of their success is from their perspective, a success. but
Yes,
that
yeah.
success has been like the problem.
Yeah, so I mean, that's why I want you to frame that, like, in this way. Because that's a gigantic issue, is defining one of the success, one of the other, it's one man's success, another man's failure.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be a better understanding of like what dictates a failure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that like, at least as an overall answer, there needs to be like the creation of some kind of governing body over like the watershed, or at least the creeks, that way. It's like a coordinating and governing body, that
Yeah,
way
yeah.
municipalities can't just like secretly have this like
Yep.
project and then not talk to any of the municipalities downstream, and
Yeah.
the municipalities like, what is all this erosion happening? Well, let's like scoop this out, put that there, and it's like, whoa, we're not gonna talk to each other.
Political decisions usually do not abide by the watersheds.
But the problem is that, you know, with some of the divides being like within the creek, like anytime there's, you know, trash in the creek, or anytime it comes to doing anything with the creek,
Getting
that
people
it-
responsible for it is a no-no. It's still possible.
Some
Yeah.
jurisdiction is
Right on the border.
It was yours, and you decided to screw it up.
No, it's
You
not
know,
the way it
so
works, but
that kind of, that's like the main end goal, is to have that way they can't just do something like the Brentwood Down project, which was basically like taking two fuel tanks and then just like.
yeah, so, all right, I'm gonna, just giving you a couple like general research tasks. Familiarize yourself with natural channel restoration in urban areas. What is used, what's been successful? That's what I wanted to see from you, like a week ago, okay? Like just kind of a list of projects in different cities would be awesome. Because I know there's some really cool, successful, like, projects where urban rivers and streams have really been turned around and being the center of areas rather than just a border.
Yeah.
So look for those examples and look how, like, compare those examples to your case here. And that's how we're gonna build a body of evidence to say that you didn't do a good job.
Yeah,
And also just, I mean, like, I just can't believe how blatant they can just lie, like, or if they get greenwashed the living crap out of something like that. They can just straight up just like lie, just. I mean, I learn more and more about like how the choice of terminology creates, well, it protects people, I guess I'll say. Here in the academic world, higher ups like to use the word emotional intelligence to separate themselves from people who get worked up about things that they care about. Yeah, no.
I decided to get out.
Huh?
Before I take this conversation personally, I need to get out.
Well, I took it personally when I heard that term, because sucked all the life, got sucked out of me. Yeah, it pisses me off, man. Like the second you drop orders, like you create disparage like between groups of people, and like it's fundamental. Like you create races, next thing that's racism. You create religion, next thing up religious force. So it's interesting, but yeah, those greenwashing terms, they just use those to protect themselves. Say, oh, we did this in our project, or we're greening up the greenway. Yeah.
Every inch rocks. And I tried going back, isn't there like, committee hearing things and like all of their proposals to committees and all that? No, it's.
So can you,
Rocks, stones or anything anywhere. It was only about, planting native trees. It's like you didn't even do it.
Can you also assemble some information on like the involved parties for this too?
That's
So
what
that way.
I'm trying to work my way back through it because apparently there's some miscommunication gap somewhere with regular Greenway and Maplewood and whatever contractors they contracted.
Yeah.
There's some.
'Cause I have some experience working in the stream restoration like community. And I know we have offices here in St. Louis that do stream restoration work. I would love to figure out what company's responsible to stuff like this. Yeah, I don't
Like just from like past projects, like, concrete with those like little rocks that
Yeah.
they use for sidewalks. There was even a huge chunk of like whitish rock that had a cutout that was so obvious for like a pole.
Yeah.
But, like a pencil hydrant that just have in creek now. It's like what?
like, that's not pretty.
It's like, I was like, what? Was it
Trash.
like Great River Greenways like trying to act like, it's like.
Yeah, it's pretty perfect material is probably how they view it these days. It's either going. Yeah, no.
But the issue is I'm fairly certain, and I need to go back through some of my photos. I'm fairly certain that section that closest to like the Great River, it comes up. You can see it come up and then get it back down and then kind of come back up to the walkway.
Okay.
And, the bridge is extremely impacted, like if you put a leveler on it, it's like this.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, it's collapsing and everything, but it looks like, since they had just taken everything out and then that rock embankment collapsed and then they just filled that in with dirt.
Allegedly.
Well, it's on both.
Gotta be careful with what we're saying.
It's on both sides, there's like this little, like, rows of rocks on both sides of that you can stick your hand like way down into it.
Yeah.
And versus like.
Gallery.
Yeah, well, versus, where all of the rocks are and how that like extra, I guess for management or like fix thing where they added that other section of rocks. They again, like they scooped out that amount and then they put rocks and they just like stick your hand pretty far down.
Yeah.
So that is also pretty telling that was kind of like what they were going for and then it, collapsed. And so they just filled it with dirt, but since they got rid of all the deep rooted plants, even though they said they were gonna plant deep rooted plants, but.
Well, right now they are.
Yeah, we needed something like now, not like
Right,
20 years from now, if it's there, but, that whole like shelf. Is especially, there's like a, water runoff, and there's that, kind of like patchy grass like thing with the mesh on top of it. kind of curious on what's under that, because I feel like there's, lots of separation there. Because you can see the water just like straight down and kind of putting this section out and it's like sliding over.
I mean, it's very well understood in
It's like it's just gonna fall in.
Yeah. So when you put a rock in a channel of flowing water, scour occurs right around that rock. And when you rip wrap an entire bank like that, scouring is gonna occur around every single rip wrap boulder that you place in there. So your material needs to be able to stand that first off, and your rip wrap also needs to be thick. I mean, deep enough and also cover enough of the channel where the energy can dissipate amongst the rip wrap before it goes downstream. Typically that doesn't happen very well.
But just that whole section, it's more about the fact that it's a action reaction, but there's no context for the reaction to that action. They just see the symptoms of it.
So all right, next week for me, Roy.
It's involved in down, so I don't.
Next week for me, let's wrap this up. I gotta get going. Next week for me, take care of this thing. Learn some about natural channel design, natural channel restoration in urban areas, and just start creating a checklist of whether or not point part project here. Yeah, I know, we can talk about it. That'll give us more to go off of. Okay. All right, man. I'll see you.
Thank you.
No problem.
You're going to send me the form.
Yeah, I guess so. You emailed me like a couple days ago now.
Did I? I don't think I emailed you about that.
Will you please come bother me again at some point about it? I'm not like, I'm gonna get in here tomorrow to work and I'm not.
Don't mind bothering you, but I'm afraid like if I bother you, my advisor is like, you should go through me. So I don't really know where the